Debra Morgan doesn't start as a detective. She starts as a victim on a table. Plastic crinkles under her as she wakes up on the ice truck killer's slab, wrists bound, dressed red with someone else's blood and her own. Cut, she's in the shipping container with the Skinner, wrists raw, screaming as he leans in with the blade. Cut, her hand shakes around a gun pointed at Lagerta, sweat and tears blurring the badge in her sights. Cut, Deb lies motionless in a hospital bed, machines screaming, the line on the monitor beginning to flatten. Over all of it, we hear Dexter's calm voice, talking about control, about the plan, about Harry's code. I always follow the rules. I always stay one step ahead. As he narrates his meticulous psychology of killing, the investigation that will never trace back to him, we're not watching clean kill rooms and tidy ocean dumps. We're watching the collateral damage. We're watching his sister's life collapse in real time. Let's kick things off by making that contrast impossible to ignore. Every time Dexter tells us he has a system, we cut to another moment where Deb is paying for that system in blood, in trauma, in moral failure. Stalk the target, protect the secret, keep the code. That's the plan. But the images say something else. Deb on the floor, Deb in the chair, Deb in the bed. In this video, we're going to reframe that gap between what Dexter thinks he's doing and what actually happens to the one person who loves him without conditions. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on his kills or his near misses, but on the way every season pushes Deb further from the foul-mouthed rookie chasing approval to the broken woman who can't live with what she's done. We intercut Dexter's narration about being born in blood, with Deb literally drowning in the aftermath of his choices. His plan to protect her from Brian ends with her on that table. His plan to keep the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation contained puts her in the crosshairs of killers drawn to his orbit. His plan to manage Lagerta in Season 7 ends with Deb pulling the trigger on her mentor, her morality, and any illusion that she's just a cop doing her job. Then we land on the final image, Dexter carrying Deb's body into the storm, wrapped in limp, the hurricane swallowing them both. The ultimate act of control, he decides when her story ends. The ultimate admission of failure, everything he did to keep her safe, led here. Hard cut. Young Deb in the backyard, watching Harry praise Dexter's latest achievement. She's on the outside of the frame, straining forward, desperate for a scrap of that attention. This is the real crime scene. This is where her trajectory bends. We hold on her face, hopeful and already insecure. While the voiceover shifts, this is not Dexter's story of control. This is Deb's story. The central question is simple and brutal. What do those carefully constructed plans look like when you stop focusing on the monster and start counting the cost to the human life standing right beside him? And along the way, we're going to see that Deb was never just collateral. She was the bill coming due. So let's kick things off by breaking one comfortable illusion. Debra Morgan is not just the foul-mouthed comic relief with a badge and a heart of gold. When we treat her that way, we're repeating Dexter's own blindness, reducing the person most damaged by his double life to background texture in his psychology. On the surface, the popular reading makes sense. Deb is the moral compass, the scrappy underdog who claws her way up from insecure rookie to lieutenant. She chain smokes, swears through every briefing, and throws herself into the investigation with reckless passion. She's the normal one, right? The human anchor that proves there's still something good orbiting Dexter's darkness. But when we step back, when we track the actual consequences across each season, a darker pattern snaps into focus. Deb is the one whose entire trajectory is bent, broken, and finally erased by Dexter's plans. In this video, we're going to suggest a different frame. Imagine Dexter not as a serial killer procedural, but as a long, slow forensic report on one woman's life. To keep this clear, ignore the blood slides for a second and follow the blast radius. Every time Dexter's plan for control collapses, it doesn't just end in a messy kill room or a close call at Miami Metro. It lands on Deb. Season 1. She dates the ice truck killer, unknowingly becoming bait in a case literally grown from Dexter's childhood trauma. Later, she's kidnapped by the Skinner, targeted, shot at, emotionally gutted. These aren't random misfortunes. They're the invisible receipts for Dexter's secret world. That's where Dexter's self-narration starts to look less like insight and more like misdirection. He talks about the code, the ritual, the careful compartmentalization as if they guarantee control. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. Leave no evidence. But if we shift the camera from his table to Deb's face, what do we actually see? Escalating trauma. Mounting guilt. A woman pushed, again and again, into moral compromises she never would have considered without Dexter's shadow pressing on every decision. Her arc stops being a quirky side plot and becomes the real emotional through line. From the little girl desperate for Harry's approval, overshadowed by a brother she can't understand, to the detective who will literally walk into a church and watch that brother stab Travis Marshall in the heart. From the cop who believes in justice to the sister who pulls the trigger on Lagerta to protect a serial killer. By the time we reach that hospital bed in Season 8, Deb isn't just unlucky. She is the accumulated damage of years of proximity to Dexter's failed control fantasy. So when her survivable gunshot spirals into a fatal brain injury, it doesn't play like a shocking twist. It feels like the only ending the story has been quietly writing for her from the pilot. The central question becomes unavoidable. Was Deb ever really making her own choices, or has she always been reacting to the fallout of Dexter's collapsing plans? In the next section, we're going to trace that fallout, season by season, and watch how every attempt at control writes another line in Debra Morgan's autopsy report. So if Deb's life reads like an autopsy report written in real time, we need to be clear about the method. We're not just replaying her biggest scenes and crying over the greatest hits of her trauma. We're building a case file. Every phase of her life becomes a crime scene, and the prime suspect is Dexter's illusion of control. In this video, we're going to treat Deb's story the way Dexter treats a body on his table. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on what happens to her, but on how his plans, safeguards, and blind spots slice through her trajectory. When he thinks he's shielding her from the truth, when he thinks he's managing risk, when he convinces himself the code will keep his family safe. We'll pause and ask, what did that decision actually do to Debra Morgan? That means shifting the investigation away from the kills and onto the blueprints behind them. Each major section will track a plan, Dexter deciding to keep his origin secret, to use his job at Miami Metro as cover, to compartmentalize his relationships, to handle Brian, Miguel, Lumen, Hannah, even Harrison. We'll map intention, execution, and fallout, then follow the consequences across season after season until they land, often violently, in Deb's lap. Let's kick things off in childhood, where Deb grows up chain-smoking her way through insecurity, desperate for Harry's approval, and never understanding why Dexter always seems to win a game she can't see. That early psychology matters. Her need to be a good cop, a good daughter, a good sister, makes her uniquely vulnerable to Dexter's lies and half-truths. When she throws herself into Miami Metro, that's not just ambition. That's a little girl still trying to solve the mystery of why Harry loved Dexter differently. From there, every milestone becomes a case study in miscalculation. Deb dating the ice truck killer without knowing he's Brian. Deb hunting the Skinner while Dexter stalks his own targets in the same city. Deb falling for Lundy, Quinn, other men whose fates bend around Dexter's secret life. The central question in each of these moments is simple. What was Dexter trying to control? And how did that attempt at control quietly booby-trap Deb's world? We're also promising psychological depth, not just plot recap. Along the way, we'll sit with Deb's PTSD, her guilt after walking in on Travis Marshall's murder, the moral collapse that leads her to pull the trigger on LaGuardia. We'll ask how much of her choice is really choice when every path has been narrowed by years of manipulation, omission, and crisis management. And we're going long term. From her first scene to her last breath in that hospital bed, we'll treat Deb's life as one continuous chain of cause and effect, not isolated tragedies. Each discovery, each promotion, each breakdown will be another pin on the board, another red string leading back to Dexter's failing code. In the next section, we start at the beginning. Harry's house, 2 siblings, and the original lie that makes everything else inevitable. So, if Deb's life is one long chain of cause and effect, we need a way to see the links. To keep this clear, we're going to track 3 kinds of failure in Dexter's impact on her: operational, relational, and existential. 3 layers, 3 depths, 3 ways the illusion of control peels back. Let's kick things off with operational failures. These are the moments where Dexter's plans as a killer or as a cleanup artist misfire in the real world, and Deb's body is the collateral. Concrete, physical danger. Deb chained to a table. Deb in a plastic-wrapped room. Deb in a hospital bed. From the ice truck killer kidnapping her at the end of Season 1 to the Skinner stringing her up over that rooftop edge in Season 3, Deb keeps ending up exactly where Dexter swears his code will prevent innocent people from landing. His secret investigations, his proximity to monsters, his confidence that he can manage the risk, all of that funnels straight into her being targeted, stabbed, shot, or left bleeding out while he improvises another plan. We'll watch how each operational failure raises the stakes on her survival. Then the damage goes deeper. Relational failures are the slow-motion collapses. These are not about a knife at her throat. They are about lies at her core identity as a sister and a cop. The focus is not just on what Dexter does in the field, but on what he hides at the dinner table. Think about Season 1 again. Dexter lets Deb fall in love with Brian, never telling her that her charming new boyfriend is his biological brother and the man reconstructing their shared childhood trauma. Later, he lets her build a fantasy with Lundy, while the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation quietly circles him. His emotional distance, his evasions, his small manipulations of evidence and timing. They all corrode Deb's sense that she knows the people in her life, that her instincts as a detective are trustworthy. How many times can your reality be edited before you stop trusting your own judgment? Finally, we have existential failures. This is the deepest level, where Dexter's very existence as a secret killer detonates Deb's moral framework. Not just my brother lied, but my entire sense of right and wrong might be wrong. From the moment she walks into that church and sees him killing Travis Marshall, every season after becomes a study in existential collapse. She covers for him, she rewrites reports, she literally helps him kill LaGuardia, executing a woman who was right about the Bay Harbor Butcher. The cop who once worshipped the badge now wakes up with PTSD, self-loathing, and the belief that she is beyond redemption because she chose Dexter's darkness over the law. That choice doesn't stay in one season, it warps her entire trajectory. In this video, we're going to keep tagging each major Deb turning point with these 3 categories. When she's kidnapped, that's operational. When her relationships implode under the weight of Dexter's secrets, that's relational. When she questions whether any justice system means anything after what she's done, that's existential. Each major section will show how those layers stack. An operational crisis forces a lie. The lie fractures a relationship. The fracture pushes Deb toward a decision that rewrites her ethics. Along the way, we'll see how what begins as Dexter protecting her physically ends with him dismantling her from the inside out. In the next section, we go back to the early years and watch the first operational failures take shape. Harry's training, Brian's game, and the moment Deb becomes bait without even knowing there's a hook. So let's kick things off by laying the track we're going to be riding for the rest of this video, because Deb's life is not a series of random misfortunes. It's a straight line that bends, again and again, around Dexter's need for control. We start in the Morgan household. Deb is the biological child, the one who should be the default center of Harry's world, and yet the emotional gravity in that house orbits Dexter. She's outside the garage, while Harry is inside, teaching Dexter the code. She's learning to shoot to impress her dad, while Dexter is learning how to kill to satisfy him. From the beginning, Deb's psychology is defined by this invisible competition she can never win, chasing an approval Harry already spent on his secret project. That hunger for validation becomes her career trajectory. Deb claws her way up from vice, in cheap wigs and bad motels, begging to be taken seriously. She moves into homicide, then into the lieutenant's office, but every promotion is really a test. Can she finally be worthy in the room Harry built? On paper, it looks like success. In practice, it's a constant investigation into her own inadequacy, because the standard she's measuring herself against is the myth of Dexter. The perfect son Harry trusted with the real plan. Along the way, her relationships become pressure points where Dexter's double life keeps detonating. She dates Brian, the ice truck killer, and literally becomes bait in a story that predates her. A brother's game that ends with Deb on a plastic wrap table and Dexter choosing blood over family. She falls for Lundy, the one man who sees her competence clearly, and Dexter's Bay Harbor Butcher trail pulls Lundy into Miami and ultimately into a parking lot with a bullet in his chest. Quinn gets too close to Dexter's secret. Their romance collapses under suspicion and half-truths. Then, the most controversial beat, Deb's romantic feelings toward Dexter surface, just as she walks into the church and sees him kill Travis Marshall. The moment she's finally ready to choose him, she discovers he's been choosing murder all along. From there, the unraveling is almost mechanical. She finds the kill room. She covers up Travis's death. She kills Lagerda at the shipping yard, shooting the one person whose investigation is actually correct. The PTSD, the nightmares, the drugs, the self-hatred, the attempt to reinvent herself as a pie in season 8, none of it is random collapse. It's the psychology of someone who has broken their own moral spine to hold up Dexter's code. And then, the hospital. A gunshot that should be survivable. A surgery that seems successful. A sudden clot that turns a second chance into a vegetative state. Dexter walks into that room, turns off her life support, and dumps her body in the storm, folding her into his ritual as if that can contain the consequences. In this video, we're going to circle back to each of these beats in detail, and to keep this clear, we'll keep asking the central question. Was this fate, or was this Dexter's plan failing in slow motion? When we zoom in on the early operational failures next, Harry's training and Brian's game won't just explain Deb's deathbed. They'll make it feel inevitable. So, if Dexter's life is an investigation into failed control, Deb's life is our crime scene. To keep this clear, we're going to process every major Deb milestone, like a report, intention, safeguards, breaking point, fallout, not just what happened, but what everyone thought would protect her, and how those protections quietly collapsed. Each major section will start with Dexter's plan. What did he intend for Deb in that moment? Was she supposed to be shielded, distracted, elevated, or weaponized without knowing it? Then we'll track the safeguards he believed in, Harry's code, his own forensic skills, the illusion that keeping her in the dark kept her safe. Those are the locks on the door. We're going to watch, step by step, how each one fails. But that's only half the file. Along the way, we'll also treat Deb as an active agent with her own plans. Her childhood drive to impress Harry, her ambition to rise from foul-mouthed vice cop to lieutenant, her need to be loved by men like Brian and Lundy, her attempts at therapy and healing after every trauma. The focus is not just on Dexter's psychology, it's on how his hidden agenda warps her trajectory until her choices don't feel like choices anymore. Let's kick things off with a pattern that starts in season 1 and never really stops. Deb is kidnapped by the ice truck killer, a man she's dating, in a case tied directly to Dexter's origin. On paper, she survives. Case closed, right? In this video, we're going to keep reopening that file. We'll cross-reference that abduction with her later reactions to danger, her obsession with proving herself, her attraction to damaged men, and finally, her decision to protect Dexter at the cost of her own morality. What looks like a single near-death experience becomes the template for how she walks into every threat afterward. We'll do this constantly. When Deb is targeted by the Skinner, when she falls for Lundy and then loses him, when she walks into that church and sees Dexter killing Travis Marshall, we'll jump forward and backward in time. How does a lie in one season echo as a panic attack 2 seasons later? How does covering up Lagerda's death turn a survivable gunshot into a death sentence that feels less like bad writing and more like a verdict? The central question isn't just why did Deb die? It's how many times was her ending rehearsed in smaller, quieter failures? By the time we reach that hospital bed, the ventilator, and Dexter's final mercy, we want her fate to read like the only honest outcome of this world's logic. Not a twist, a conclusion. When we move into the next section and start with Deb's early career and Brian's game, watch how quickly her life stops being collateral and becomes the real crime scene we're investigating. So when we say Deb's life becomes the real crime scene. Season 1 quietly shows us how early that investigation should have started. Before the ice truck killer, before the plastic wrap, back in the Morgan house, where the first body on the floor is Deb's sense of worth. Let's kick things off from her side of the table. Young Deb grows up orbiting 2 fixed stars, Harry, the cop hero whose badge might as well be a halo, and Dexter, the weird, quiet brother, who somehow keeps getting the softest version of that light. She's outside the door while Harry whispers with Dexter. She's watching ride-alongs that never include her. She's hearing praise she can't quite earn. The central question for her becomes simple and brutal. What's wrong with me that I'm not the special one? To keep this clear, Harry is running a 2-track plan. One child is secretly trained to stalk, isolate, and kill people without leaving evidence. The other is told to study hard, hit the academy, and uphold the law. Same father, same house, opposite mandates. It's a grotesque mirror. Dexter gets a code to justify breaking the law. Deb gets a badge to enforce it. Harry thinks he's maintaining control, containing a monster, designing a system. In reality, he's engineering a lifelong, invisible competition that Deb can never win, because she doesn't even know the rules. Watch how that distortion shows up in her psychology. Deb doesn't just want to be a cop, she needs to be a cop. loudly, aggressively, foul-mouthed, and over-prepared. The cigarettes, the profanity, the workaholic grind, the way she begs for homicide assignments in Season 1. These aren't random quirks, they're armor. If Dexter is the golden child for reasons she can't see, then Deb's only path is to outwork, outbleed, and outmoral everyone in the room until Harry's ghost finally salutes her. How do you compete with a standard that's literally built on murder you're excluded from? Along the way, the focus is not just on her ambition, but on the consequences of that rigged game. Deb is constantly throwing herself into danger, chasing cases that, by pure narrative cruelty, keep looping back to Dexter. Brian targeting her, the Skinner kidnapping her, investigations that skirt the edges of the Bay Harbor butcher. On some level, she's chasing Harry's approval. On another, she's chasing the outline of a secret that keeps slipping just out of frame. And this is where Dexter's first existential failure toward Deb really lands. By accepting Harry's secret training, by agreeing to the code and the hidden kill rooms, he silently consents to a family dynamic where Deb is the decoy child. She absorbs the pressure, the doubt, the feeling of being backup Morgan, so he can maintain the illusion that his darkness is under control. He doesn't set out to sacrifice her, but that's the trajectory. The moment he steps onto Harry's path, Deb is drafted into a competition she can't see and can never win. In the next phase, when Brian enters the picture, that invisible game stops being metaphor and becomes literal. Deb herself is placed on the slab as bait in a family reunion she doesn't even know she's hosting. Deb walks into this phase of the story already hungry. Hungry for a promotion, for validation, for someone to finally look at her and not see Harry's other kid. So when Brian Moser shows up as the charming, attentive guy who actually listens, we watch a lifetime of insecurity melt in record time. The vice cop in cheap clothes suddenly has a man who calls her beautiful. That's not coincidence, that's targeting. To keep this clear, Deb's arc with Brian is not a side romance. It is the operational core of Season 1. We move from awkward coffee dates to a whirlwind engagement, and along the way she keeps telling Dexter how different this feels, how Brian really sees her. The tragedy is that he does. He sees her as the perfect pressure point to reach the brother he's been stalking through blood patterns and childhood trauma. Meanwhile, Dexter thinks he has a plan. He believes he can treat the ice truck killer as a puzzle, indulge his curiosity, and still keep his real life quarantined. He's tracking crime scenes, reading the messages left in drained bodies and chopped mannequins, convinced that his forensic access, his meticulous ritual, and Harry's code give him control of the investigation. He will stay ahead of Miami Metro, learn who this rival predator is, and, in his mind, protect Deb by winning the game early. On paper, the safeguards look solid. Dexter has the lab, the blood work, the crime scene photos before anyone else. He has emotional detachment, the belief that he's immune to normal human blind spots. He has the code as a checklist: don't get caught, don't get personal, don't let feelings interfere. But these exact strengths become blinders. Because he is so focused on the killer's interest in him, he misses the obvious. Any predator studying Dexter's past will find the family he doesn't value enough to defend. The breaking point is brutal. Deb wakes up strapped to a table, plastic wrapped like one of Dexter's own victims, blue tape and clear sheeting, turning a romantic night into a kill room. Brian stands over her, not as the fiancé she thought she knew, but as the ice truck killer, revealing that her entire relationship was leverage. His fantasy is simple and deranged, a brotherly reunion with Dexter choosing blood over morality, with Deb as the sacrificial offering. How much more literal can Deb as bait get? She survives, technically, but the aftermath is where the deeper failure lives. Deb learns she was engaged to a serial killer. Her trust radar, already fragile, is shattered. Men, institutions, her own instincts, all suspect. And Dexter? He lets her believe this was random bad luck. A tragic brush with a monster no one could have predicted. The focus is not just on the near death, it's on the lie of omission that follows. Dexter never fully admits, in her eyes, that his miscalculation about Brian's interest in him almost got her killed. This is a pure operational failure with relational fallout that will haunt every investigation and every romance she touches afterward. Because if the first man who really saw her was a serial killer, what does that say about every man who walks into her life next? And what happens when the next one isn't using her to reach Dexter, but is destroyed by him instead? So when the ice truck case ends, it doesn't actually end for Deb. We cut from plastic wrap and a severed hand to hospital gowns and fluorescent lights. But the investigation just moves inside her head. Her first instinct is not to collapse, it's to perform. She cracks those shaky jokes in the hospital bed, swearing, minimizing, insisting she's fine. She pushes to get back to work, back to the badge, back to anything that feels like control. If Brian turned her into a victim, she will overcorrect by becoming the cop. No weakness, no pause, just throw herself into the next case and pretend the last one didn't almost end with her on a kill table. To keep this clear, Deb's bounce back is not resilience. It's denial weaponized as a career plan. Every time she tells someone she's okay, we can feel the lie hanging in the air. And the person who should be able to see through that most clearly is Dexter. Instead, Dexter goes quiet. The camera lingers on his calm face at her bedside, on the flat reassurance in his voice. In the text of the show, he tells us he doesn't know how to comfort her, that his psychology is too damaged to access the right emotion. But underneath that narration is a different failure. Staying distant is easier than confronting that his secret brother, his secret past, almost murdered the only person who truly loves him. This is where the code becomes a shield, not a guide. If he frames it as emotional incapacity, then he never has to ask the central question: what did my choices, my silence, my attachment to this double life actually do to Deb? The focus is not just on his inability to cry, it's on his refusal to trace the consequences back to himself. And Deb, tragically, reads that distance as strength. Dexter isn't hovering. He isn't treating her like glass. So in her mind, he's the one person who doesn't see her as broken. She leans on his calm like it's bedrock, deepening a dependence that's built on a lie, that he's simply steady, not hiding the fact that the man who kidnapped her was his brother, engineered around his trauma, circling his life. Along the way, a pattern locks in. Deb normalizes extreme trauma as part of the job, bodies on hooks, near-death experiences, stalkers and skinners all get folded into the cost of doing business. Dexter normalizes lying to her as part of his job. Omissions about Brian turn into half-truths about Dokes, about Lila, about every collapsing plan that bleeds into her world. Each major section will show this same trajectory, but Season 1 plants the seed. She survives the ice truck killer and learns the wrong lesson. Danger is survivable, manageable, even meaningful if it proves she's a real cop. So when the next threat appears, when the next relationship feels risky or volatile, why would she flinch? This invisible scar is going to resurface every time she tells herself, I can handle it, right up until the moment she can't. Season 2 is where that I can handle it story collides with reality. Deb is shaking, sweating, waking up, screaming from dreams of being on that table again, and the show finally lets us see how much damage the ice truck killer actually did. The central question becomes, what does recovery look like when the danger isn't over, it's sitting at your kitchen table. Let's kick things off with the basics of her PTSD. In those early episodes, Deb jumps at every loud noise. She checks locks twice. She scans rooms like every stranger might be Brian in a different mask. Nightmares bleed into her mornings, and we watch her chain smoke outside Miami Metro, because going back into homicide feels like stepping onto the same trapdoor. She doesn't just doubt the world, she doubts herself as a cop. If she missed the signs with Brian, what else is she blind to? So, she does something Dexter never truly does. She submits to an actual process. Therapy sessions, where she stumbles through the words victim and survivor. Exercises in naming her fear instead of outrunning it. She's trying to rebuild a sense of control that isn't based on bravado, but on understanding her own psychology. To keep this clear, Deb's plan this season is emotional transparency. Feel the fear. Say it out loud. Let someone in. Running parallel, Dexter is having his own panic attacks, but for a completely different reason. The bodies he's been dropping into the ocean start coming back up as the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. His perfect disposal method is suddenly a crime scene grid. Dokes is circling him on pure instinct, clocking every odd absence, every slip in Dexter's calm persona. The code is under siege, the ritual is compromised, and for the first time, Dexter is improvising night by night. On the surface, though, he presents as Deb's rock. When she leans on him, when she confesses that she's scared she'll freeze on the job, he offers comfort that looks brotherly and solid. But the focus is not just on what he says, it's on what he withholds. His distraction isn't about her pain, it's about his own exposure. He's not losing sleep over her nightmares. He's losing sleep over his blood slides. This is where her therapy collides with his secrecy. Each major section of their conversations is Deb reaching for honesty and Dexter redirecting, minimizing, or changing the subject. She's being told to open up. He's doubling down on compartmentalization. How do you heal in relationship with someone whose entire identity is a managed lie? We get small, brutal examples. Deb crying on his couch, believing they're both traumatized by Brian's crimes, while Dexter's real fear is that the Bay Harbor Butcher profile will land on his desk. Deb asking if he ever feels like he's going to break, and Dexter answering as if they're talking about grief, not the imminent collapse of his killing career. The bond looks mutual. Functionally, it's one-sided. By the end of the season, a pattern is set. Deb thinks they're surviving trauma together. Dexter is managing his own crisis first. Hers second, always. And that imbalance, once established, is going to define every escalation that follows. And nowhere is that imbalance clearer than in Season 2, when Dexter's damage control becomes Deb's new religion, without her ever knowing she signed up. Let's kick things off with Dexter's plan on paper. Dokes is closing in on the blood slides, the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation is tightening, and Dexter decides the only way to keep control is to redirect the entire collapse. Frame Dokes as the butcher. Use Lila as an emotional pressure valve. Keep his job, his code, and his family intact. In his head, it's clean. Contained, no collateral. To keep this clear, Dexter is running 2 experiments at once. Operationally, he cages Dokes, stockpiles evidence, and scripts a narrative where the most suspicious cop in Miami dies a monster. Psychologically, he lets Leela into his chaos, believing he can aim her obsession at his problems and then walk away. He thinks he's using her. He thinks he's sparing Deb. But Deb is standing right between those fault lines. She has real professional respect for Dokes. She knows he's abrasive, paranoid, intense, but she also knows he's usually right when everyone else is comfortable. And she hates Lila on sight, clocks the manipulation, and watches Dexter defend her anyway. From Deb's perspective, what does that teach her about whose instincts get trusted and whose get dismissed? When Dokes dies in that cabin explosion, branded forever as the Bay Harbor Butcher, Deb loses more than a colleague. She loses proof that the system can recognize its own truth-tellers. The investigation she poured herself into ends with the wrong man's face on the board, the wrong name in every headline, and no way to fix it. Justice, in her world, is officially misdirected. Then, Leela almost murders Dexter, Rita's kids, and by extension the fragile family fantasy Deb is trying to believe her brother deserves. Leela slips out of the country, nearly untouchable, while Miami Metro closes the file on Dokes and moves on. The focus is not just on what the law misses, but on what it chooses to accept. A dead cop as convenient closure, a living predator as a loose end. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this quiet shift in Deb's psychology. She can't name it yet, but Season 2 teaches her that the official story is negotiable, that the investigation is only as honest as the narrative it serves. Isn't that the perfect primer for eventually accepting Dexter's vigilante code as a necessary evil when the system fails? By the end of the season, Dexter thinks he's restored control. Dokes is framed, Lila is gone, his secret is safe. But Deb's faith in the badge, in the idea that truth naturally rises to the surface, has already started to erode. And the next time the job asks her to choose between what happened and what's on the record, we'll see just how much Season 2 has rewired her. So when we move into Season 3, we're watching two different recovery projects unfold under the same roof. Deb is trying to rebuild her faith in the badge, while Dexter is trying to rebuild his illusion of control. On the surface, both plans look like they're working. Professionally, this is the first season where Deb actually feels like a detective, not just Harry's daughter playing cop. She's sharper in the field, more aggressive in interviews, and when the Freebo investigation heats up, we see colleagues actually defer to her instincts instead of patting her on the head. That's not a small shift. After years of being the foul-mouthed rookie in Dexter's shadow, she's finally building a track record that belongs to Debra Morgan, not Harry's legacy. To keep this clear, think about her Season 1 self chasing the ice truck killer versus the woman who locks in on the Skinner. Early Deb is guessing, begging for approval, constantly checking Dexter's face for validation. Season 3 Deb is reading crime scenes, pushing back on brass, and trusting her own read of a suspect's psychology. She's still volatile, still wounded, but the investigation no longer treats her as a liability. She's an asset, and Miami Metro starts to treat her that way. Meanwhile, Dexter is staging a different kind of promotion. Engagement ring for Rita. Baby on the way. Barbecues with assistant De Miguel Prado. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this pattern. Every time Dexter thinks he's upgrading his life, he's actually multiplying pressure points. Here, he frames it as a controlled experiment in having it all. Family, friendship, and the code humming quietly in the background. Miguel becomes the centerpiece of that plan. Dexter believes he can selectively reveal his darkness, train Miguel like a junior partner, and still maintain operational control. On paper, it's elegant. In practice, it's the first time he weaponizes intimacy as part of the code, and that's a line he can't uncross. From Deb's perspective, though, none of that danger is visible. What she sees is Dexter getting exactly what she's been told she can't have: stability, a partner who loves him, kids, a home that doesn't smell like stale takeout and gun oil. The central question for her becomes painfully simple. If Dexter can build something normal, why can't she? So, she doubles down on the job. More hours, cleaner cases, fewer shortcuts. She treats normalcy like a promotion you earn through sheer effort. Here's the pattern interrupt. This is the rare Dexter season, where Deb doesn't experience a catastrophic operational failure. No ice truck killer kidnapping, no Bay Harbor butcher implosion, no direct exposure that blows up her case. The relative calm is the trap. It convinces her that the worst is behind them, that competence and hard work can insulate her from the chaos we know is still coming. And Dexter buys into that same illusion. He thinks the Miguel situation is containable, the engagement is proof the dark passenger can coexist with domestic life, and that Deb's rise at work means his world and hers are finally aligned. Parallel progress, parallel peace. But that's exactly why the next collapses will be so brutal. For the first time, Deb has something solid to lose: status in the department, a fragile professional identity, and a renewed hope that her life might not be defined by trauma. When those pillars crack, we're not just watching a detective blindsided by a bad case. We're watching the only person who ever believed in Dexter's humanity discover what that belief actually costs. Season 3 builds her up just enough that Season 4 can tear through everything she thinks she's secured. Season 3 builds her up just enough that Season 4 can tear through everything she thinks she's secured. And it does that in the cruelest way possible, by finally letting Deb taste something like real happiness right as Dexter turns her life into collateral for his next big plan. When Lundy walks back into Miami, we watch Deb do something we almost never see from her. She softens. The cigarettes, the armor, the constant need to prove herself to Harry's ghost and Dexter's shadow ease up for a second. She lets herself imagine a life that isn't just late nights at Miami Metro and trauma in the rearview. It's messy and tentative, but it's growth. She's not just chasing a promotion anymore. She's reaching for emotional maturity, for a partner who actually sees her. To keep this clear, Deb's arc here is not just another doomed relationship subplot. It's the show testing whether she can build a stable identity that isn't defined by violence. She's gone from dating the ice truck killer to being groomed by the Skinner to finally choosing someone who represents competence, stability, and genuine care. The psychology is brutal. The moment she believes she might deserve more than pain is the moment the narrative quietly marks her as vulnerable. Meanwhile, Dexter is staring at Arthur Mitchell like he's found a holy grail. Trinity is the fantasy made flesh. Decades of killing, no arrest, a house in the suburbs, a wife and kids who, on the surface, adore him. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern. Every time Dexter thinks he's discovered a blueprint for control, he's actually standing on the edge of another collapse. Trinity represents the central question of Season 4. Can the dark passenger coexist with a real family? Or is that idea itself the most dangerous delusion? Dexter's plan is elegant in his head. Study Trinity. Map the rituals, the routines, the cover story. Learn how to balance murder and domesticity, then apply those lessons to his own life with Rita and the kids. Maintain distance from the official investigation, keep his family out of the blast radius, and treat Arthur Mitchell as a living manual on sustainable duality. On paper, it's perfect. No direct contact, no shared victims, no overlap. Except there is overlap. Immediately, Deb and Lundy dive into the Trinity investigation from the law enforcement side, just as Dexter begins his secret surveillance of Arthur. 2 tracks, same target, no coordination. The focus is not just on the danger of Trinity himself, but on the way these parallel plans intersect without anyone realizing it. Deb thinks she's just working a case with the man she loves. Dexter thinks he's running a private field study no one can see. What actually forms is a perfect storm. Operationally, Dexter's surveillance drags the killer closer. Relationally, Deb's renewed hope with Lundy pulls her into the line of fire. Existentially, Trinity will expose that Dexter's dream of a safe, compartmentalized life is a lie. Each major section will show this escalation, but Season 4 is where all 3 layers of failure converge in one place. And standing at the intersection, once again, is Debra Morgan. The question is not whether something will break, it's how much of her life Dexter's plan will take with it. Season 4 answers that question with a gunshot in a parking lot. We watch Deb walking toward Lundy under those ugly sodium lights, caught between 2 men who represent 2 completely different trajectories. Anton is the messy, present-tense life she's built through pain. The musician who stuck around after the Skinner, the proof that she can have love without a badge attached. Lundy is the calm future she never thought she deserved. Retirement plans. Shared cases. A version of herself that isn't chasing approval from a dead father. For once, she's on the verge of choosing based on desire, not damage. And then it's gone in a few seconds of chaos. Shots, blood on the pavement, Lundy down, Deb bleeding, their investigation literally blown open. On the surface, this isn't Dexter's plan misfiring. Trinity doesn't pull that trigger. The killer is a separate player. But to keep this clear, we have to track how Dexter's private war with Arthur shapes the entire context of that night. By the time Lundy returns to Miami, Dexter already knows more about Trinity than anyone at Miami Metro. He's seen Arthur's ritual, he's followed him, he's confirmed the pattern that Lundy is still chasing on paper. The focus is not just on what Dexter does, but on what he withholds. If he shares what he's learned, Lundy and Deb approach the case with different parameters, different safeguards, maybe a different sense of urgency. Instead, Dexter keeps control by keeping secrets, and the investigation fractures into parallel tracks that never fully align. Lundy dies thinking he's closing in. Deb survives thinking she's the one who brought danger to him. That's the psychology of her grief spiral, guilt, rage, and a renewed conviction that love is a liability. She replays every moment she hesitated with Anton, every second she kept Lundy at arm's length. If she had chosen sooner, would he have been somewhere else? If she hadn't gone back to the scene, would he still be alive? The central question for Deb is never who shot him so much as, what does this say about me? Her rage has nowhere clean to land. The shooter is almost random, the timing cruel, the consequences permanent. So she turns it inward and outward at the same time. Of course this happens when she starts to believe she deserves something steady. Of course the universe snatches away the one relationship that looked like a healthy anchor. And where is Dexter while she's drowning in that logic? Half present at the hospital, already being pulled back toward Trinity, toward the new baby, toward the fantasy that he can juggle it all if he just refines the code one more time. He offers comfort in fragments, then vanishes into his own cat and mouse. Operationally, he's chasing Arthur. Relationally, he's absent when Deb needs him most. Existentially, he's reinforcing the story that her pain is background noise to his mission. In this video, we're going to keep tracking that pattern, because Lundy's death is more than a tragic beat. It's a relational and existential failure point. Deb's best model for a stabilizing, non-destructive love is ripped out of her life inside a world distorted by Dexter's secret war. She doesn't know that yet, but the trajectory is set. Every time she reaches for more, something breaks. The next time, it won't just be a lover on the ground. It'll be Deb herself, standing over Dexter's truth with a gun in her hand. So, when we cut from Deb reaching for Dexter's gun in that church to Lundy bleeding out on the pavement, it doesn't feel random anymore. It feels like the universe doubling down on the same lesson. Every time Deb tries to step toward a life beyond work and beyond Dexter, something dies. In season 4, that something is her last clean idea of love. Lundy is executed in a parking lot, collateral damage in an investigation she doesn't even understand yet, and Deb's response is brutally simple. She goes back to work. She doesn't heal. She converts. All that grief, all that terror, gets poured straight into the Trinity hunt. She fixates on the case with the same intensity she once reserved for chasing Harry's approval. The plan becomes, if she can help catch this monster, maybe the universe will make sense again. To keep this clear, Deb is chasing Trinity as a symbol. She thinks she's hunting a stranger who shattered her future. We know she's actually orbiting Dexter's secret war with Arthur Mitchell, a killer woven seamlessly into the fabric of family life. Husband, father, church going pillar of the community. The central question Trinity plants in Deb's psychology is insidious. If a man like that can be a serial killer, what does monster even look like? From family photos on the wall, to kids at the dinner table, to a wife making excuses, the Trinity investigation normalizes a terrifying idea. Predators don't just lurk in alleys. They sit at breakfast. They tuck their children in. They live inside the same domestic fantasy Deb has been taught to crave. Along the way, Deb watches Miami Metro crash into those contradictions. Good father, bad man. Incomplete justice. And notice what happens to her methods. She pushes harder. She leans on suspects, cuts emotional corners, bends rules when the clock is ticking. Nothing as overt as planting evidence yet, but the line between by the book and whatever works starts to blur. Each major section of that season shows her accepting that justice is often partial, delayed, or ripped away entirely. Lundy's killer is caught, but Lundy is still gone. Trinity dies, but Rita dies with him. There is no version of events where the scales actually balance. That's an existential failure, not just an operational one. The world fails to add up. Each time Deb survives another horror without the full truth, her moral compass doesn't shatter, it warps. A little more tolerance for gray, a little more willingness to say, if the outcome protects people, maybe the method doesn't matter. Pattern interrupt. What if that's the real legacy of Trinity for Deb? Not the case file, but the quiet belief that monsters can also be protectors. Because when she eventually stands over Lagerta with a gun on that dock, the path will feel disturbingly straight. From Lundy's body to Arthur's suburban fade to Dexter's code, Deb has been rehearsing the idea that some deaths are necessary to preserve a fragile illusion of control. And that belief that some deaths are necessary walks us straight into season 5, where Dexter turns that idea into an actual operating plan. Let's kick things off with the image that redefines his control after Rita's murder, a terrified woman in plastic, Lumen, staring at Dexter like he's just another monster. Instead of killing her to protect the secret, he pivots. New trajectory. He decides he can repair his shattered code and his psychology by helping a survivor take revenge on the men who tortured her, while still keeping Miami Metro, and especially Deb, completely in the dark. On paper, it's elegant. Identify each Barrel Girl rapist. Confirm their guilt. Build joint kill rooms that satisfy Lumen's need for justice and Dexter's need for ritual, all while erasing evidence so the official investigation stalls. The focus is not just on punishment. In Dexter's mind, this is therapy. A way to prove the code can be altruistic. But every time he tightens the plastic, Deb is already circling the same names on a whiteboard. To keep this clear, we have 2 parallel investigations running on a collision course. Deb and Quinn chase the Barrel Girls case, the shipping containers, the videos, the pattern of missing men. Dexter and Lumen chase the same monsters in real time, breaking into houses, abducting suspects, dumping bodies. When they stalk Boyd Fowler, Deb is on the case. When they go after Cole Harmon at the hotel, Deb is literally downstairs running surveillance. The operational failure isn't that Dexter leaves a fingerprint. It's that his entire vigilante partnership is moving in the shadow of Deb's competence. And Deb feels it. We watch her intuition flare in those small, charged beats where the official story does not add up. She stands over the rescued victim in the motel and says someone else got there first. She looks at the crime scene where Jordan Chase's associate dies and senses design, not chaos. The central question starts to form in her mind. Is there someone out there doing the work the system can't or won't do? Then we hit the parking garage. Dexter and Lumen, masked and trapped behind plastic sheeting, listening as Deb aims a gun at them through the barrier. Deb talks about victims reclaiming power, about understanding why someone would want these men dead. And then she makes the choice that quietly detonates Dexter's entire moral architecture. She lets them go. She doesn't know it's Dexter. She doesn't know she's just morally greenlit his extracurricular life. But from our vantage point, this is a near-miss operational failure with massive existential implications. Deb has already decided, in principle, that she can live with a killer who targets monsters. So when she later finds out that killer is her brother, is it really a new decision, or just the bill coming due on a line she already crossed in the dark? Because in the next season, Miguel Prado will not be the only one Dexter tries to mold. The idea of a partner has been tested, and Deb is walking closer to the blast radius every time he does it. Miguel was Dexter's rehearsal for a partner. Lumen is the real thing. And while that experiment plays out in warehouses and on plastic, Deb is across town trying to stitch herself back together with nothing but work and willpower. Season 5 opens on Deb in the wreckage of Lundy and Trinity. She's bruised, but functional. She's chain-smoking less, swearing just as much, and clinging to the investigation board like it's the only solid object left in her life. The psychology here is important. Every time intimacy blows up in her face, she doubles down on the badge. Harry's approval is gone, Lundy is dead, Trinity slipped through her fingers. So she marries the job. Again, to keep this clear, Deb is not collapsing the way we might expect. She's compartmentalizing. She throws herself into hunting Boyd Fowler, into protecting vulnerable women, into being the detective Harry would have been proud of. On the surface, it looks like growth. More discipline, more control, more command presence at Miami Metro. But underneath, that same old hunger is still there. To be chosen, to be trusted, to be let in. And this is exactly where the trajectory of her life quietly diverges from Dexter's. Because while Deb is chasing Boyd as a case, Dexter is chasing Boyd as a target, and then as Lumen's tormentor. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this split screen. Deb in the light of the official investigation. Dexter in the shadows with a different plan entirely. Lumen becomes something Deb has never been allowed to be, a witness to Dexter's full reality. She sees the kill rooms. She shares the code, even if she doesn't call it that. She participates in the ritual. For the first time, Dexter's intimacy is not theoretical or edited, it's operational. They stalk together, improvise together, nearly die together. The focus is not just on a romance, though the show flirts with that, but on a partnership where his darkness is not a liability. It's the glue. From Deb's angle, Dexter's distance reads as normal. New father stress. Grief over Rita. The understandable fog of a widower trying to keep it together for his son. She offers to babysit. She covers shifts. She tells herself, this is what a good sister does. Why would she suspect that while she's trying to be his support system, he's found someone else to share his truest self with? That's the relational failure of this season. Deb is pouring everything into being better. Better cop, better leader, better sibling, while Dexter is quietly investing his emotional energy in a secret partnership she doesn't even know exists. Each major section will show us a version of this pattern, but here it's almost elegant in how invisible it is. No big fight, no obvious betrayal, just a slow drift, and along the way, the show is planting a deeper wound. Every time Dexter gives someone else the unedited version and gives Deb the mask, it confirms her oldest fear, that she's always a step outside the inner circle. So when she eventually walks into that church and sees who he really is, will it feel like a shock? Or proof that her worst suspicions about herself were always right? Because the next phase of her story won't just isolate her emotionally. It will weaponize that isolation. And then the universe hands her what she thinks she's always wanted: the big chair, the gold shield, the title that says she finally made it inside the circle. Debra Morgan, Lieutenant of Homicide. On paper, it looks like the end of her isolation. In practice, it's the most elaborate illusion of control the show ever builds around her. Let's kick things off with how that promotion actually happens. It's not a clean meritocracy win. It's a three-way collision: LaGuerta's political maneuvering, Matthew's scandal, and Deb's very real investigative competence. LaGuerta backs Deb, not because she suddenly believes in her, but because Deb is useful optics, a hardworking, media-friendly cop who can stabilize the department while LaGuerta protects her own trajectory. Deb solved high-profile cases, survived multiple serial killers, and earned the respect of her squad. But the machinery lifting her up is still fundamentally self-serving and corrupt. To keep this clear, Deb's psychology in that moment is split. She's proud. She's terrified. She's hearing Harry in her head. The little girl who watched her father train Dexter now has the rank Harry never gave her emotionally. Yet the central question won't go away. Did she earn this, or did the game get rigged for her again, just in a more flattering direction? Every press conference, every briefing at the head of the table is shadowed by that imposter syndrome. She wears the white suit, but she still feels like the kid in Hand-Me-Downs, and that's where the illusion of control really tightens. As lieutenant, Deb believes she finally has her hands on the levers: resource allocation, case priorities, tactical decisions. She can direct the investigation, shape the plan, protect the people she cares about. But right under her nose, Dexter is still running his private code, staging kill rooms, editing reality to fit his needs. The focus is not just on her new authority, it's on how useless that authority is against a threat she can't even name. Pattern interrupt. Think about how inverted this is. Dexter used to sneak around a low-ranking detective sister. Now, the head of homicide is living with him, supervising him, and still can't see the blood. That's not competence failure. That's structural blindness built by Harry's original design. Her new role also spikes the consequences of any slip. If Dexter's plan collapses now, it doesn't just endanger Deb physically. It detonates her entire career. Any operational failure, a bad alibi, a piece of evidence tracing back to the lab, a witness who remembers his face, loops directly to her badge. She signed off on the overtime. She vouched for the analyst. She commanded the scene. Her identity as the good cop, the one who finally rose above the mess, is suddenly tethered to the very mess she can't see. In this video, we're going to keep tracking that irony, because Season 6 turns Deb's promotion into a trapdoor. She thinks she's stepping into Harry's shoes, finally inheriting his mission. Instead, she's about to discover the real legacy he built in her family, a hidden killer in her inner circle, and a code that makes a mockery of everything her badge is supposed to mean. Deb walks into that church thinking she's about to fix her life. Instead, she walks into the moment that destroys it. From the second she leaves the station, we're watching two completely different plans racing toward the same door. On Deb's side, the psychology is almost painfully earnest. She's just untangled, or thinks she's untangled, the mess of her romantic feelings for Dexter. She's talked it through, rationalized it, decided the only way forward is brutal honesty. So she does what Deb has always done when she wants control back. She charges straight at the problem. Flowers. A confession rehearsed in the car. The belief that if she can just say it out loud, everything will finally make sense. Inside the church, Dexter is running the opposite play. One more kill, one more ritual, one more time he can keep his worlds separate and intact. Travis Marshall strapped to the table, plastic sheeting glowing in stained glass light, the tools laid out with that familiar, methodical precision. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. Leave no evidence. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that rhythm. Because, right here, Season 6 turns it into a joke at Dexter's expense. To keep this clear, Dexter's plan is not improvised. He has chosen the place, timed it around the investigation, and convinced himself that if he can just finish the Doomsday case on his own terms, the Bay Harbor butcher pattern stays buried. He's still clinging to Harry's code as a shield, still narrating to himself that this is justice, that he's in control. The central question, though, is how long reality is going to let him keep that story. The answer is exactly one knife stroke. Deb pushes open the church doors at the precise second Dexter's blade sinks into Travis's chest. No build-up, no time to adjust. Just that frozen tableau, Dexter in his kill clothes, hand on the hilt, Travis gasping, plastic everywhere. The tools glinting at Deb like a crime scene she was never meant to investigate. His face when he looks up at her is the real kill. You can see his entire constructed persona collapse in a single, stunned second. The focus is not just on Deb discovering he's a killer. It's the layered betrayal behind it. This is her lieutenant, the man under her command, exposed as a vigilante operating right beneath her badge. This is Harry's golden son, revealed as the thing Harry supposedly fought against. This is her foster brother, the quiet kid she spent a childhood chasing for scraps of attention, revealed as someone who has always been living a second, secret life, while she broke herself, trying to live one honest one. Along the way, the show has primed us for operational and relational failure. But this is the definitive existential failure. Dexter's illusion of control over who knows his secret is gone. Deb's entire understanding of her past, her career, her family, is instantly contaminated. What does it mean to be the moral heart of the investigation when the monster has been riding shotgun your entire trajectory? The next phase of Deb's story isn't about catching killers anymore. It's about surviving the knowledge that the code she trusted by proxy was a lie, and that loving Dexter now means living inside his kill room, whether she wants to or not. So when Deb walks into that church and sees Dexter drive a knife into Travis Marshall, the moral heart of the investigation doesn't just crack, it detonates. We watch her go straight into fight or flight, but because she's Debra Morgan, she tries to turn both impulses into a plan. Her first instinct is denial as damage control. This was a one-time thing. Dexter snapped under stress. The Doomsday case got to him. She clings to any narrative that lets her keep Dexter inside the category of good man who lost control instead of serial killer I've been working beside for years. She drags him back to his apartment, demands explanations, and then, crucially, reaches for therapy. If she can force him into a psychiatrist's office, maybe she can staple his darkness to a clinical diagnosis and keep her world from total collapse. Dexter, meanwhile, is already shifting into a new strategy. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern. When exposure looms, Dexter doesn't confess. He curates. In the church aftermath, he decides to drip feed Deb the truth. Yes, he has urges. Yes, it's been going on a long time. No, she doesn't need to know the full body count or how deep the code really runs. To keep this clear, he's trying to manage her like any other risk in an investigation. Control the information, control the outcome. But Deb is not just a variable. She's a cop and a sister, colliding in real time. The central question for her becomes, which badge comes first? The one on her chest, or the one Harry pinned on her heart when he told her Dexter was special? Her psychology can't hold both, so she starts rewriting her own boundaries instead of rewriting Dexter. She moves into his apartment not to arrest him, but to monitor him. She stalks his movements the way she would a suspect, then talks herself down because he's family. That's where the early compromises start to stack. She lies to her own detectives about why she was at the church. She fudges timelines. She waves off Dexter's bizarre late nights and missing hours with the same he's just Dexter shrug that used to mean social awkwardness, not homicide. Each major section of this season quietly documents her bending procedure, ignoring instincts about the Bay Harbor butcher, rationalizing Harry's code as a misguided but loving attempt at control, accepting that his darkness isn't going anywhere just because she begs it to. Along the way, every attempt to fix things pulls her deeper. The more she covers, the more she knows. The more she knows, the less she can imagine turning him in without annihilating herself. By the time she admits to herself that Dexter has been killing for years, she's already complicit in covering up Travis. Already corrupted as lieutenant, already living in his kill room, in everything but name. And this is only the first turn of the spiral. Because the next time Deb tries to reassert control, she won't just bend a rule. She'll redraw the line between law and love with a gun in her hand. So when we hit season 7, and Deb doesn't just witness a kill, but starts cleaning up after one, that line she redrew with a gun in her hand starts smearing in blood. This is the moment where her role in the story mutates. She's no longer the cop orbiting Dexter's secret. She's part of the operation. Let's kick things off with that first active cover-up. Deb walks into a crime scene, not as Lieutenant Morgan securing evidence, but as Dexter's sister erasing it. She helps him move a body, wipe down surfaces, manage the logistics of a kill she would have torn apart in any other investigation. The gloves aren't for forensics anymore. They're for complicity. From a distance, it looks like just another late-night cleanup. Up close, it's a total identity breach. Dexter, of course, frames this as adaptation. His plan is simple. If Deb already knows, better to bring her into the process than leave her flailing on the outside. He tells himself he can control the variables, control her access, control the risk. To keep this clear, in his mind, this is damage control, not escalation. But every time he hands her a trash bag or a towel, he's rewriting Harry's code in real time. The secret no longer protects her. It uses her. Inside Deb, we can feel the rationalizations spin up. She fixates on who Dexter targets, leaning hard on the idea that these are monsters the system let walk. It echoes her earlier leniency toward Lumen and the vigilante spree in Season 5, if the official channels fail. Maybe off-the-books justice is the only option. She tells herself this is temporary, exceptional, a grim necessity. But how many exceptions can you stack before they become your new rule? Operationally, this is another category of failure hiding in plain sight. The focus is not just on the body in front of them, but on Deb's badge, her career, her freedom, her psyche. Every shared cleanup is a new trail of potential evidence linking Miami Metro's lieutenant to the Bay Harbor Butcher's methods. Each major section will, from here on, show Dexter trying to compartmentalize while the compartments leak into each other. Deb isn't a shield, she's now another point of exposure. And psychologically, the consequences are brutal. Once you've wrapped a corpse in plastic and helped your brother dump it, pulling a trigger on LaGuerta later doesn't come out of nowhere. It feels like the next grim step on a trajectory already set in motion. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this pattern: logistical cooperation, softening moral resistance, practical choices paving the road to existential collapse. Deb doesn't wake up one day ready to kill her mentor. She gets there one body bag at a time. Which raises the central question for the rest of her arc. After you've crossed this line, is there any version of Deb Morgan that makes it back? Or are we just watching the slow, procedural dismantling of the show's last conscience? Deb has already killed once for Dexter, and the universe does not let that go quietly. The LaGuerta investigation is the bill coming due, not just for Dexter's code, but for every compromise Deb has made to stand between him and the world. Let's kick things off with LaGuerta's clarity. While the rest of Miami is content to let James Dokes die as the Bay Harbor Butcher, she looks at the same evidence Dexter thinks he has under control and feels the wrongness. Dokes never used plastic. Dokes never had a boat. The blood slide box recovered from his car is too perfect, too planted. From the cabin explosion to the marina records, LaGuerta's plan is deceptively simple: reopen the old investigation and follow the pattern forward instead of backward. When fresh Bay Harbor-style bodies appear and a new slide surfaces, the trajectory points not to a dead cop, but to the quiet blood guy down the hall. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on LaGuerta closing in, it's on how Deb volunteers herself as the buffer. As lieutenant, she can assign cases, redirect resources, and conveniently lose leads. She hides the church surveillance footage. She explains away Dexter's proximity to crime scenes as coincidence or professional diligence. When LaGuerta pulls Dexter's old GPS data and finds his boat near a dump site, Deb weaponizes her badge, confronting LaGuerta in private, reframing it as harassment, and forcing the investigation back into the shadows. But this is where the relational failure crystallizes. Deb is no longer only lying for Dexter. She's lying to protect the version of herself that chose him in the church. If LaGuerta proves Dexter is the real butcher, what does that make the woman who burned evidence, obstructed justice, and kept working homicide as if nothing had changed? Exposure doesn't just mean Dexter's arrest. It means the collapse of Deb's entire identity as a cop, a sister, a moral center. She isn't shielding Dexter from the investigation so much as shielding herself from the consequences of her own decisions. Along the way, we watch her self-respect erode in increments. She plants evidence against Estrada to prop up Dexter's cover story. She signs off on LaGuerta's rogue theories in meetings, then sabotages them off the clock. Each major section of this arc forces a choice: back the badge or back the brother. Every time, she picks Dexter, and every time, the cost gets higher. How do you look your detectives in the eye after you've falsified a report to protect the serial killer you love? All of this funnels toward the shipping container dock. LaGuerta, Deb, Dexter, a gun, a body on the floor. The investigation, the lies, the code, the psychology of every choice she's made since the church, all of it converges in one fluorescent lit box, where no badge, no rank, no plan can keep these worlds separate anymore. Something has to break, and the next phase of Deb's story is about who she becomes once she pulls that trigger. So we're back at that dock. Fluorescent light buzzing, plastic rustling in the night breeze, LaGuerta on the ground, waking up into a nightmare she's already solved in her head. Her gun is up on Dexter before he can finish the script he's written for her. You're under arrest. It's not just a line. It's the entire weight of the law, the investigation, the truth, aimed straight at him. Then, Deb walks in. In this video, we're going to sit in that instant where her world splits. On one side, LaGuerta, her boss, her mentor, the woman who clawed her way up the same ladder Deb's been climbing, now literally embodying the system Deb swore to protect. On the other side, Dexter, the brother she built her whole emotional life around, the person Harry always told her was special, the center of every plan she's made for who she is and who she wants to be. To keep this clear, the central question in that room is brutal. Is Deb a cop, or is Deb Dexter's? Dexter thinks he's already answered it for her. His plan, walking into that shipping container, is pure Dexter psychology. Isolate the threat, control the environment, manufacture a neat solution where LaGuerta dies as collateral in a Bay Harbor butcher resurgence, and Deb never has to see the final cut. He underestimates two things: LaGuerta's refusal to stay in the narrative he's written, and Deb's refusal to stay out of it. He believes he can choreograph the collapse without letting it touch her directly. That belief dies the second she sees the tableau. Watch Deb's face when she raises the gun. It's not a decisive vigilante moment, it's fragmentation. Her arm is literally shaking between them. She begs Dexter to stop, begs LaGuerta to back down, because she's still reaching for a third option that doesn't exist. When she pulls the trigger, it's almost a flinch. LaGuerta drops, and Deb's expression doesn't read victory or even grim resolve. It's immediate horror. Instant recognition that there is no going back to the woman who once lectured Quinn about dirty cops and compromised cases. Because this is not just killing a colleague. Deb has just murdered the only person in Miami Metro who was unequivocally right about Dexter. She doesn't just silence a rival, she executes the truth. In that moment, the badge, the oath, the years of chasing monsters in alleys and under bridges all get subordinated to one imperative: preserve the lie that Dexter can still be saved. The focus is not just on the bullet, it's on what that bullet erases. And this is where Dexter's code finally reveals itself as an existential failure. A system designed to protect innocence has, through seasons of rationalizations and shifting lines, funneled the person he loves most into killing an innocent woman in cold blood. His meticulous control, his careful rules, his constant "I've got this" have pushed Deb from moral center to accomplice to executioner. Along the way, every safeguard Harry imagined has inverted. So, who is Debra Morgan after the dock, when the smoke clears and LaGuerta's body cools? The next phase of her story answers that, and it only gets darker from here. Deb, after the dock, is not a redemption arc. It's a slow-motion self-destruction we can't look away from. Season 8 opens on absence. No badge. No desk at Miami Metro. Deb has exiled herself into a dingy pie gig, chasing cheating spouses and low-level fugitives, while snorting lines off motel dressers and washing them down with whatever's in reach. The woman who once hunted serial killers is now deliberately walking into rooms with armed felons, without backup, like she's daring the universe to pull the trigger for her. This isn't random recklessness. It's a plan, a twisted, unconscious plan for self-punishment. Deb keeps inserting herself into dangerous investigations, not because she believes in justice, but because she doesn't care if she makes it out. Every bar fight, every near miss on a takedown, every night she drives drunk is her way of replaying that shipping container with LaGuerta and asking, over and over, why she's still breathing. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on guilt. Deb doesn't simply regret killing Ligurta, she feels contaminated by Dexter's world. She talks about herself like she's rotten, like Harry's badge was never meant for someone who could pull that trigger. The central question in her psychology becomes painfully simple: if she could execute an innocent woman to protect a serial killer, what does that make her? Not just compromised, irredeemable? And Dexter, predictably, responds with another plan for control. In this video, we're going to keep seeing this pattern. Crisis hits, Dexter designs a fix. Here, his fix is Deb. Get her off drugs. Pull her out of the pie gutter. Convince her that what happened with Ligurta was a tragic necessity. Then sell her on a clean exit where they leave Miami together and start over. New city, new life, same dark passenger, carefully managed. On paper, it sounds almost hopeful. In practice, every attempt to save her is a trigger. When Dexter shows up at her pie office, when he drags her to dinner, when he tries to talk about a future, he's not a lifeline. He's the walking reminder that none of this started with Ligurta. It started with Harry's code, with years of lies, with every body Dexter wrapped in plastic, while Deb worshipped a father who was grooming a killer. There's a brutal scene where Deb, high and drunk, drives them both into the water, trying to kill Dexter and herself in one gesture. That's the pattern interrupt of the season. She's not just spiraling. She's actively rejecting his narrative that they can move on. Stalk the pain, confront the source, erase them both. Along the way, all three failure categories converge. Operationally, she's a hazard, blowing cases, endangering herself and others. Relationally, their bond is poisoned. Every conversation curdles into accusation, revulsion, or numbness. Existentially, her sense of self collapses. She's not a cop, not a hero, not even a functioning person in her own eyes. She's Dexter adjacent, and that, to her, is a life sentence. And yet, the show doesn't leave her there. The next movement in Deb's trajectory tries to rebuild her, at least on the surface. But when you patch over a shattered foundation, what happens the next time reality hits? That patched over phase arrives in the shape of an older British woman with a box of DVDs and a clinical smile. Dr. Evelyn Vogel steps into the season as the so-called architect of Dexter's code, and overnight, Harry's tortured improvisation is reframed as a designed experiment. For Deb, that's not just a plot twist in the investigation. It's a new, horrifying explanation for her entire childhood. Let's kick things off with that reframing. Harry is no longer the lone, guilt-ridden father making impossible choices. He's a collaborator, a man who sat with a neuroscientist and workshopped his son's darkness like a treatment plan. To keep this clear, Vogel doesn't just claim she advised him. She shows Dexter footage, presents file, narrates his development as if he were a case study. Deb grew up in that house. Suddenly, all those nights she felt invisible become collateral damage in someone else's experiment. When Deb finally meets Vogel, we can feel the oscillation immediately. On one level, she is desperate to understand. She asks the central question that's been eating her alive. Was any of this inevitable? Was Dexter always a monster, or did Harry and Vogel build him this way? On another level, every word out of Vogel's mouth lands like a slap. The doctor talks about Harry's code, about channeling urges, about necessary sacrifices, and she does it with that calm, academic tone that treats Deb's trauma as a footnote. This is where the brain-surging case becomes more than just the season's investigation. Serial killings, brain extractions, cryptic messages to Vogel, professionally, it pulls Deb back toward the work she used to live for. Existentially, it offers a test. If someone like Dexter is out there, circling Vogel, can that darkness be profiled, contained, maybe even cured? Or is the entire project of control already a failure? Along the way, Deb keeps putting herself in proximity to the thing that broke her. She rides in cars with Dexter. She walks crime scenes that echo his kill rooms. She sits across from Vogel as they dissect the psychology of predators. Each choice functions like a stress test. Can she be near blood, near lies, near the code itself, without collapsing again? Or is she fundamentally broken now, permanently misaligned with the badge she still technically holds? We watch her vacillate between numbed competence and sudden collapse. One moment, she's sharp, interrogating suspects, tracking the brain surgeon with that old relentless focus. The next, she's drinking, lashing out, confessing to Vogel that she doesn't know who she is if she's not better than Dexter. The focus is not just on whether she can solve the case, but whether solving it will finally give her pain a purpose. It doesn't. Vogel's framework explains Dexter, but never heals Deb. The brain surgeon is another monster, another crisis, another arena where Dexter's code fails to prevent collateral damage. As the season barrels toward its final crisis, Deb is still adrift, having stared into the design behind her family and found no redemption there. Only the blueprint of her own undoing. And once that blueprint is exposed, the next question becomes brutal. If the system that made Dexter can't save Deb, what will he do when she finally, completely falls apart? If the blueprint is rotten, what happens to the person who built her whole identity on following it? With Deb, the answer is simple and devastating. She drives the blueprint straight into the ocean. Let's kick things off with the image itself. Night, rain, Dexter in the passenger seat, bruised, exhausted, still clinging to the illusion that he can fix this if he just finds the right plan. Deb behind the wheel, hands shaking, eyes hollowed out by LaGuerta's death, PTSD. And the slow realization that every promotion, every solved case, was built on a lie she never consented to. She swerves. The guardrail explodes past the headlights. And then there's only water. Concrete, metal, glass, and bubbles give us the clearest expression of Deb's psychology we ever get. This is not a heat-of-the-moment swerve. It's an attempted murder-suicide. In one move, she's trying to erase Dexter the killer and Deb the accomplice, to end the investigation before the investigation ends them. The focus is not just on punishment. It's mercy, too, in the most twisted form she can imagine. To keep this clear, Deb has reached a point where she sees no path to redemption as long as both of them exist in the same world. She's tried the other routes. Therapy, denial, helping Dexter refine the code, as if better targeting could wash LaGuerta's blood off her hands. Every option has collapsed. So the central question in her mind becomes brutally binary. Do we keep living this lie, or do we stop existing altogether? And of course, even here, Dexter's control fantasy infects the moment. He fights her. He survives. Bystanders pull them from the water. Sirens, spotlights, the whole machinery of consequence roars back to life. On paper, this looks like a narrow escape. In practice, it's another failure. Deb can't even end the story the way she chooses. That's where this scene plugs directly into the existential failure category we've been tracing. Operationally, the crash is a mess. Relationally, it's a point of no return. But existentially, it's worse. Deb's agency has been eroded so completely by Dexter's secret life that the only decision she feels she still owns is whether they live or die, and the universe, or fate, or just bad timing, strips even that away. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern. Every time, Deb reaches for control. Something in Dexter's trajectory knocks it out of her hands. She can't choose her brother's nature. She can't choose the code. She can't choose justice. Now, she can't even choose death. which means when the series finally does take her life away in a hospital room with a random complication and a pulled plug, it doesn't feel like closure. It feels like the universe finishing the job this river started. So the question becomes, if Deb can't author her own ending, who really does? And what does that say about the world Dexter built around her? So when we cut from that river to Deb, back behind a desk at Miami Metro, it feels almost merciful. She's upright. She's working cases. She's off the bottle. Mostly, on the surface, the trajectory looks upward, like the investigation into her own life finally closed with a clean, rehabilitated ending. We watch the slow rebuild. Deb enters law enforcement through the side door, smaller assignments, consulting, then easing back into real detective work. She hits the gym instead of the bar. She swaps chain smoking in her car for paperwork in the bullpen. There are scenes where she's trading gallows humor with Quinn again, navigating witness interviews, even showing flashes of that old sharp instinct that once made her lieutenant. To keep this clear, the show gives us all the classic visual markers of recovery, routine, responsibility, competence, but look closer at what those routines orbit. Every time Deb stabilizes, Dexter is still the hidden center of gravity. She's reviewing cases that intersect with his kills. She's monitoring his proximity to danger. She's not rebuilding a life, she's rebuilding a position from which she can keep him from collapsing. The focus is not just on her badge coming back, but on how that badge quietly reattaches her to his code, his secrets, his plans. We see it in the way she talks. Deb frames her progress as handling it for Dexter, as if her sobriety is another protective measure, like falsifying a report or moving a body. She's not processing LaGuardia's death, she's managing it. No therapy breakthroughs, no real confrontation with the fact that she executed an innocent woman in a shipping container. Just work, adrenaline, and a carefully maintained distance from the truth. The small tells keep leaking through. A twitch when LaGuardia's name comes up, a flash of rage when someone questions Dexter's integrity, that hollow look when she's alone in the car after a good day. These are not rare exceptions in Deb's life. These are the rule. She has learned to wear functionality like armor, but underneath, the guilt over LaGuardia and her complicity in Dexter's world is still raw, still radioactive. And Dexter, true to pattern, misreads the data. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that gap between what Dexter thinks is happening and what actually is. Here, he sees Deb's functional mask and concludes the experiment worked. She can move on. He can move on. So, he sketches one last clean exit plan with Hannah and Harrison, convinced that leaving town will neatly sever the damage. This is his final relational miscalculation. He confuses Deb's ability to perform recovery with genuine healing, and that error becomes structural. When the storm hits in the finale, when the investigation, the hospital, and his own choices converge, we realize the collapse was preloaded right here. Along the way, the central question stops being, can Dexter save Deb? And shifts to something darker. What happens when the person you broke learns to stand again, but only in the shape you need them to be? So when Dexter finally sketches an exit plan that looks clean on paper, it feels almost merciful. Fake his death in the chaos of an oncoming hurricane, disappear with Hannah and Harrison to Argentina, and leave Deb behind with something she's never had, a life that isn't orbiting his secret. On the surface, that's the first time his plan is to remove himself from her story instead of rewriting it. To keep this clear, Dexter's strategy has 3 neat beats. Stage a disappearance that satisfies Miami Metro and the Bay Harbor Butcher mythology. Use the storm as cover to vanish with Hannah, the poisoner he's reframed as a partner, and Harrison, the child he swears he's finally protecting. And most importantly, free Deb by omission. No confrontation, no confession, just absence. In his head, that's mercy. In practice, it's another attempt at control disguised as sacrifice. Meanwhile, Deb walks into what she thinks is just another high-risk investigation. Oliver Saxon, the brain surgeon, is a serial killer, a personal threat to Vogel, and a professional embarrassment if they don't close the case before the storm hits. For Deb, this is work. A dangerous case? Yes, but still within the familiar frame of files, warrants, and arrests. She doesn't see that Saxon is the convergence point for Dexter's entire trajectory, Harry's experiment, Vogel's psychology, the code, every compromise stacked on top of each other. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between what a character thinks is happening and what's actually in motion around them. Dexter believes he can wrap up Saxon like any other late-season monster. Track him, capture him, deliver a final kill that ties off the brain surgeon thread before he steps on a plane. He underestimates Saxon's volatility, the institutional chaos of Miami Metro scrambling under storm warnings, and the literal weather system that will knock every safeguard out of alignment. Deb, for once, is cautiously hopeful. She's seen Dexter try and fail to go normal with Rita, with Lumen, with the suburban fantasy. But here, as Hannah and Harrison become tangible rather than theoretical, she starts to believe he might actually escape the cycle. The focus is not just on her forgiving him, it's on her daring to imagine a version of herself that isn't constantly cleaning up his consequences. That tiny flicker of hope is exactly what makes what follows feel inevitable. Because look at all the moving parts in play. Hannah hiding in plain sight, one arrest away from prison. Harrison, a child already marked by one mother's bathtub and one father's code. Saxon, hunting and improvising. Miami Metro, half distracted by evacuation orders. And above everything, the storm, promising convenient erasure and delivering random disruption instead. How could a man whose life is a graveyard of failed plans believe this one will hold? Along the way, the central question shifts again. Not will Dexter get away, but how many people have to stand in the blast radius of this final attempt at control? Deb is about to find out, and she'll pay for that answer in the one place she's always been strongest. Deb is about to find out in the one place she's always been strongest. The job. A hallway, fluorescent lights, the hum of a hospital that's already on edge because of the brain surgeon investigation. This is not a dark alley or a kill room. It's supposed to be a controlled environment. And that's exactly why what happens here feels like such a brutal violation of the plan. Let's kick things off with the confrontation itself. Deb and Quinn are moving Saxon through the hospital, a high-value serial killer in custody, the kind of caller Deb has chased her entire career. The choreography is rushed but familiar. Uniforms, handcuffs, a tight formation down a sterile corridor. Then, in a breath, control evaporates. Saxon seizes an opening, grabs a gun, and the scene fractures into chaos. Shouts, scrambling, a single shot. Deb goes down. We see it in real time. She's hit, she's conscious, she's even talking. The wound is bad, but the framing is clear. This is serious, not final. We've watched Deb survive the ice truck killer, the Skinner, shootouts, breakdowns, and the psychological collapse of learning Dexter's truth. Why would this be the thing that ends her? The central question, in that moment, isn't will she die? It's how fast can they stabilize her? Dexter's reaction locks that in. He rushes to her, eyes wide. But you can feel the denial hardening into a narrative. Deb has always been the one who bounces back. The constant in a life of spiraling consequences. He tells himself she'll pull through because she has to, because his story requires her to. In his psychology, this is another crisis to manage, another mess his code adjacent crusade has accidentally created, but will somehow absorb. To keep this clear, the medical assessment doubles down on that illusion. Doctors explain that the bullet is lodged, that she needs surgery, that it's dangerous but manageable. The language is cautious optimism, the tone familiar to anyone who's watched a network hospital scene. She's not fine, but she's not gone. The focus is not just on survival, but on recovery, rehab, time, Deb cracking jokes about smoking in the EQ. We're primed to read this as yet another brush with death. But operationally, this is Dexter's failure laid bare. Saxon should never have been in that hallway with that much leverage. Dexter had multiple chances to neutralize him cleanly, to end the threat before it reached Miami Metro, before it reached Deb. Instead, he played with the investigation, toyed with control, tried to orchestrate the perfect takedown that fit his personal code and his need for poetic justice. The delay puts Saxon exactly where he can do the most damage, in front of Debra Morgan, unshielded. Along the way, the series has trained us to expect Dexter to pay in blood when his plans collapse. What we don't expect is the specific cruelty of what comes next. Deb stabilizes. She talks. There is a moment where it looks like the worst is over. Then, in a heartbeat, a clot, a complication, a catastrophic brain injury. Many fans read that turn as the universe delivering a final verdict on Dexter's entire trajectory. And the real horror is that the punishment hasn't even fully started yet. We go from she made it through surgery to she's never coming back in a single cut. 1 minute, Dexter is standing in that hospital room, hearing doctors talk about recovery, about time, about next steps. The next, he's staring at scans and listening to clinical language that might as well be a death sentence. Massive stroke, no meaningful brain activity, vegetative state. This isn't a gunshot in a warehouse or a stab wound in an alley. This is fluorescent lights, beeping machines, and a body that looks almost fine. That's the pattern interrupt. After seasons of blood, plastic, and kill rooms, the central question suddenly shifts. What does it mean when the worst consequence doesn't look like violence at all, but like absence? Deb is right there, and she's already gone. To keep this clear, we need to track the emotional whiplash. Dexter walks in expecting the usual trajectory, crisis, surgery. Deb bounces back with some scars and some new trauma to repress. The family gathers, Harrison visits, there's talk of the future. Hope is the new plan. Then, the complication hits off screen, and the doctors describe a failure inside her brain that no one saw coming. We watch Dexter's face as the realization lands that this isn't just another wound she can push through by sheer will. The focus is not just on the medical twist, but on how it detonates the illusion of control the show has carefully built around Deb. For 8 seasons, she has been the one who fights, who claws her way up from insecure rookie to lieutenant, who survives the ice truck killer, the Skinner, the investigation into the Bay Harbor butcher, without ever fully breaking. Now, at the exact moment she seemed to have a path out, Lundy gone, LaGuerta gone, Dexter supposedly leaving, her story is frozen in a hospital bed. Fans were split on this. Many saw it as cheap contrivance, a last-minute plot device to give Dexter a tragic choice and justify his final collapse. A random clot? After everything Deb has survived, this is what takes her out? Others argue that's the point. In this reading, the universe isn't just punishing Dexter, it's cashing in every deferred consequence of his psychology and his code. Every time she covered for him, every time she compromised, every time his double life redirected the trajectory of her career and her love life, the bill was running. The stroke is the receipt. And here's where Deb's fate drops squarely into the existential failure category. She doesn't get a heroic death in the line of duty. She doesn't get a courtroom reckoning where she testifies, or a final confrontation where she chooses herself over Dexter. She gets silence. A woman who has spent her entire life demanding to be heard, swearing through every investigation, pushing back against every superior, is reduced to someone who cannot speak, cannot consent, cannot decide. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that cruelty because it's tailored to Deb specifically. Her whole identity is built on voice, on will, on refusing to back down, even when she's shaking. Now the person who always said too much says nothing. Dexter, the man who orchestrated everything, is suddenly the only one who can speak for her. And the decision he makes at that bedside will define not just the end of Deb's story, but the last, brutal proof that his need for control destroys the very people he claims to love. What does it mean when the final choice about Deb's life belongs to the man who ruined it? That's where we go next. So when we reach that hospital room, everything we've tracked so far collapses into one quiet, horrifying plan. No kill room, no plastic. Just Dexter standing over Deb, machines breathing for her, and realizing there is finally a mess he cannot clean up with a knife. This is the endgame of his control fantasy, and he answers it with the calmest murder he's ever committed. He leans in, says goodbye, and tells himself he's sparing her a life she wouldn't want. Brain death, no autonomy. Debra Morgan, the woman who clawed her way up from foul-mouthed rookie to lieutenant, reduced to a chart on a monitor. On paper, the psychology tracks. We can hear the rationalization forming in real time. She wouldn't want this. She wouldn't forgive herself for the people hurt on her watch. She wouldn't forgive him. So he reaches for the switch. The central question is whether this is mercy or the last desperate way to seize narrative control. Dexter cannot fix the investigation. He cannot undo Oliver Saxon's bullet. He cannot rewind every compromised choice that put Deb in that bed. What he can do is decide how her story ends. No debate with the doctors, no family meeting, just him, alone, turning off the machine like he's closing a file. It's chilling precisely because it's so procedural. To keep this clear, he doesn't just unplug her and walk away. He escalates. He wheels her body out of the hospital, loads her onto the slice of life, and sails her into the same ocean where he spent 8 seasons dumping dismembered killers. The ritual is unmistakable. Blue tarp, wrapped body, the slow lift and drop into black water. For everyone else, that ocean was where he erased his crimes. For Deb, it becomes her grave. In that moment, the line between sister and collateral damage evaporates. She is not given a cemetery, a headstone, a place where the people who loved her can grieve. She is processed through Dexter's system like every other consequence he doesn't want to face. Along the way, the show is telling us something brutal. The focus is not just on Deb's death, but on Dexter's need to fold even this into his private ritual of control. And that single act reframes the entire series. If Deb is the ultimate cost of Dexter's life, then the ocean isn't just a dumping ground, it's a ledger. Every bag, every slide, every splash has been accruing interest, and Deb's body is the final entry. Each major section will read differently on rewatch: Brian targeting her, Lundy dying on her watch, Lagerta in the shipping container, the PTSD, the pills, the spiral. It all points here. So what are we really seeing as she sinks? A brother ending suffering, or a killer finally admitting, through action, that his plans have destroyed the one person he truly loved. In this video, we're going to carry that question into Dexter's supposed exile and ask whether the lumberjack, the storm, and new blood are punishment, escape, or just another story he tells himself to stay in control. So when we cut from Deb's body slipping beneath the waves to Iron Lake's frozen quiet, we're not leaving her behind. We're taking her with us, inside Dexter's head, as a permanent, weaponized memory. New blood makes that literal. Deb doesn't come back as a ghost in the supernatural sense. She comes back as the upgraded voice in his skull, replacing Harry and rewriting the entire psychology of the show. Let's kick things off with that shift. For 8 seasons, Harry's code framed itself as control, rules, rituals, a plan that supposedly kept Dexter between moral guardrails. In New Blood, Harry is gone, and in his place we get Deb, blood-soaked, chain-smoking, and furious, seated in the passenger seat or across the breakfast table. The focus is not just on Dexter talking to himself, it's on who he chooses as his internal judge once the illusion of the code has collapsed. This Deb is not comforting guidance. She's accusation. When Dexter stalks Matt Caldwell, Deb doesn't coolly weigh the evidence the way Harry would. She screams at him, shoves the bullets back into his gun, forces him to imagine Harrison finding another body. Short sentence. Short sentence. Longer elaboration. We watch Dexter's old fantasy of surgical killing get drowned out by a version of Deb that embodies every consequence he's been dodging since Miami. To keep this clear, think about how different her tone is from Harry's. Harry rationalized. He negotiated with the dark passenger. Ghost Deb mocks the very idea that Dexter can manage his urges. She brings up Rita's death, Lagerta's murder, and her own brain injury as a single, continuous chain of failure. When she sits beside him in the truck and hisses that Harrison will hate him if he ever finds out the truth, that's not strategy. That's moral judgment. The key confrontations all orbit Harrison. In the cabin, when Dexter considers running, Deb materializes to tell him he doesn't get to abandon another child. At the wrestling match, when Dexter starts to project his own darkness onto Harrison, Deb pushes back, insisting the boy deserves a life that isn't a sequel to Dexter's code. Every time Dexter tries to compartmentalize Deb's death as a tragic accident, Ghost Deb drags the investigation back to the real culprit, him. And that's where her posthumous role retroactively elevates her importance. In the original run, Deb is the sister he failed to protect. In New Blood, she becomes the personification of everything he did wrong. She's not just a loss, she's the ledger. Every lie to Miami Metro, every body in the ocean, every plan that detonated in someone else's life now speaks with her voice. Along the way, New Blood quietly answers the central question of Dexter's existence. Can his life ever be justified by the code? Deb's presence says no. Even in death, she is the cost he carries, the daily proof that his trajectory isn't tragic heroism, but existential failure. And if Deb is now his conscience and his condemnation, what does it mean when Harrison starts to see through Dexter's stories for himself? If Deb is the cost, then Dexter's life is the receipt written on her body. Broken fingernails in shipping containers. Rope burns. Bullet wounds. A final stroke in a hospital bed that looks random until we track the pattern back through every season. To keep this clear, we need to zoom out from the psychology and look at the operations. Who gets grabbed, who gets shot, who ends up on the floor, because Dexter thought he could keep his world in control. And when we do that, Deb isn't just emotionally collateral. She's a recurring tactical target, over and over, in ways that escalate until there's nowhere left for her to stand safely. Let's kick things off with the ice truck killer. Deb dates Brian, falls in love, gets chained up in a kill room built from Dexter's childhood trauma. On the surface, she's a detective unlucky enough to be targeted by a serial killer she's investigating. Underneath, she's bait in a private war between two brothers created by Harry's code and the cover-up of that shipping container. Dexter doesn't see the threat to Deb until she's literally on the table. Fast forward to the Skinner in Season 3. Deb is closing in, working the investigation the way she's supposed to, and yet again, she ends up bound, beaten, hanging from a pulley. Why is she in that position? Because Dexter has been playing a parallel game with Miguel, escalating vigilante killings that stir up the city's predators and stretch Miami Metro thin. The Skinner isn't Dexter's direct enemy, but he thrives in the operational chaos Dexter helps create. Then Lundy. Deb finally finds a relationship that feels stable, grounded, outside the blood. And a shooter takes Lundy out and nearly kills her. Officially, it's Trinity's world intersecting theirs. But Trinity is only still at large because Dexter refused to hand him to the system, insisting on a private plan of surveillance and ritual justice. Every day Trinity walks free is a day Deb is exposed on that case. The bullet that shatters her shoulder is an indirect consequence of Dexter's delay. Pattern interrupt. At what point does this stop being bad luck and start being a recognizable trajectory? When Jordan Chase's circles her. When Liddy tails Dexter and grabs Deb's partner. When Saxon walks into Miami Metro and puts a bullet in Deb's gut because Dexter didn't neutralize him when he had the chance. The focus is not just on the big abductions and shootings, it's the near misses. Deb walking into the church as Dexter kills Travis. Deb arriving at crime scenes seated by his trophies. Deb driving with him while bodies he created are still in play. His enemies learn the lesson he refuses to accept. If you can't break Dexter's plan directly, you go through Deb. Each major section will keep circling this truth, but here, the operational verdict is already clear. Dexter's life is a constant physical hazard perimeter around Deb, one she never consents to because she never has the full investigation file. She thinks she's in a cop show. He's put her in a kill room she can't see. And once we understand her as a standing target rather than a bystander, her emotional collapse later isn't a twist in her psychology. It's the inevitable next phase of a long, grinding campaign against her. If Deb is living inside an invisible kill room, her love life is where we see the plastic wrap tighten. Every time she reaches for connection, Dexter's secret world is already there, waiting with a knife behind its back. Let's kick things off with Brian. On the surface, he's Deb's first real adult romance, attentive, intense, the one guy who finally seems to see her instead of the shadow of Harry's golden child. But the concrete image that matters isn't their dates. It's Deb chained to a table in a refrigerated room, begging Dexter to save her from the ice truck killer who only dated her to get to his real target. That's the pattern in miniature. Deb thinks she's in a love story. Brian is running a plan that treats her as bait in an investigation she doesn't know exists. The central question for her, going forward, is brutal. If the person who said I love you was actually aiming at Dexter, how do you ever trust your own feelings again? Then we move to Lundy, the one relationship that looks like it might escape that gravity. He's older, grounded, a stabilizing mentor who actually respects Deb's instincts. For a moment, her trajectory points somewhere healthy. But even there, Dexter's world bleeds in. The Trinity investigation that consumes Dexter also defines the space where Deb and Lundy reconnect. Lundy dies in a parking lot, shot down in the middle of the case. Dexter is secretly hijacking for his own code. Deb loses not just a lover, but the one man who offered her a version of adulthood, not organized around chaos. Dexter doesn't pull the trigger, but his obsession with Trinity keeps him close to the blast radius. The focus is not just on who killed Lundy, it's on how Dexter's need for control keeps Deb permanently adjacent to catastrophe. With Quinn, the collapse is slower, more procedural. He's a colleague, flawed but genuinely into her, trying to build something normal. And what poisons it? His investigation into Dexter, his alliance with LaGuerta's suspicions, his sense that the man at the center of Deb's life is lying about something big. To keep this clear, Quinn is punished in the narrative for being right. Deb has to choose, protect Dexter or fully invest in a partner who sees through him. She chooses Dexter, and the relationship never recovers. How do you build trust with someone you're actively gaslighting on behalf of your brother? All of that pressure culminates in the most controversial turn of all, Deb's romantic feelings toward Dexter himself. People call it shocking, but psychologically, it's the logical end of the pattern. Dexter has always been two roles fused together for her: the safe big brother who held her hand through childhood insecurity, and the dangerous secret that keeps blowing up every other attachment. When she confesses those feelings, she's not inventing something new. She's trying to resolve a lifetime of cognitive dissonance by collapsing those roles into one relationship she can at least name. If every man you love is secretly about Dexter, why not cut out the middleman? By the time we reach that point, Dexter's secret life hasn't just endangered Deb physically. It has systematically sabotaged her ability to form healthy attachments, rewiring her psychology so that danger, loyalty, and desire all point to the same person. Along the way, every failed romance tightens the trap. The only constant left, the one connection she cannot escape or fully understand, is the man who made intimacy synonymous with threat. And once we see that, her later choices around Dexter's crimes stop reading as isolated moral lapses and start looking like the only script she was ever allowed to follow, if Deb's relationships show us how her trust is weaponized. Her moral arc shows us how that weapon gets turned inward. The woman who begins as a foul-mouthed idealist in uniform, chasing promotion, and believing the badge still means something, slowly becomes the person standing in a shipping container, gun shaking, as she chooses her brother over the law. Let's kick things off with that early Deb. Chain smoking, swearing through traffic, begging to get out of vice and into homicide. She believes in the investigation, in catching bad guys, in the idea that if they just work harder, the system can deliver justice. She's insecure, yes, desperate for Harry's approval, overshadowed by Dexter, without knowing why. But her compass is pointed firmly at one thing: put monsters in cages or in the ground, and do it the right way. The tragedy is that the first major compromise doesn't look like corruption. It looks like compassion. With Lumen in Season 5, Deb finds two vigilantes who have taken out the men responsible for a torture ring. She doesn't know it's Dexter, but she sees the aftermath, sees a victim finally reclaiming control, and she lets them go. No arrest, no names, just a quiet decision to step outside the lines. It feels righteous. It is the first crack. From there, the pattern accelerates. To keep this clear, we can track it as a trajectory from bending procedure to rewriting reality. She fudges timelines, looks the other way on Dexter's strange hours, nudges Quinn off dangerous questions. Every time a case edges too close to Dexter's code, she adjusts the plan, not the suspect list. The focus is not just on what she does, but on what she stops allowing herself to see. How many red flags does she file under that's just Dexter being weird, because the alternative is unbearable? Then she walks into that church in Season 6. Travis Marshall on the table. Dexter mid-kill. In one image, the entire moral architecture of her life collapses. She doesn't just witness a murder. She witnesses the man she trusted, using the ritual she spent her career hunting. From that moment on, every compromise is explicit. She covers up the doomsday kill, she lies in official reports. She protects Dexter not as a colleague, but as a secret she is now responsible for. LaGuerta is the tipping point. The central question in that shipping container is not simply who lives, it's who is Debra Morgan now. When she shoots LaGuerta to save Dexter, she doesn't bend the law, she executes it. No badge, no warrant, no gray area. A clean bullet through the last person in the room, still trying to follow the rules. The failure here is existential. Deb proves to herself that under enough pressure, she can become the very kind of person she once hunted. And that's what she cannot forgive. Her self-hatred after LaGuerta isn't only about killing a superior. It's about the realization that her compass is not broken by Dexter's psychology alone, but by her own capacity for rationalization. If she can justify this, what can't she justify? She spirals into pills, reckless behavior, and open disgust at the face in her mirror. In this video, we're going to argue that Dexter's greatest failure is not just that Deb dies in a hospital bed. Long before her body hits the ocean, he has already killed what she represented, the belief that someone close to him could stay clean. Deb was supposed to be the moral center of the story. By the end, she's evidence that his code doesn't just eliminate monsters, it manufactures them. But the final cruelty is still coming, because the way Deb leaves the series doesn't just echo that collapse. It literalizes it in her body, in her brain, and in Dexter's last, terrible plan for her. So if Deb's body becomes the final canvas for Dexter's failure, we have to rewind to the original artist, Harry. Because the central question with Deb isn't just how did Dexter ruin her life, it's did Harry doom her long before Dexter ever picked up a knife? Let's kick things off with Harry's most consequential decision. He builds a plan around Dexter's darkness instead of shielding the rest of the family from it. Harry doesn't ask how to heal a traumatized child. He asks how to harness one. Therapy, institutionalization, even turning Dexter in, those options vanish the moment Harry decides the code is the answer. One child's pathology becomes the family's organizing principle, and Deb grows up in a house quietly rearranged around a secret she's never allowed to see. To keep this clear, watch how that secrecy shapes her psychology. Deb grows up desperate for Harry's approval, chain-smoking her way through insecurities about never being good enough, while Dexter, the supposedly broken one, is calm, centered, always oddly in control. She doesn't know that Harry is feeding Dexter a narrative of specialness every night in a car, while she gets the leftovers of his attention. The focus is not just on what Harry hides, but on who he leaves outside the real story. That lie becomes the foundation of Deb's identity. She becomes a cop because Harry was a cop. She chases monsters because she thinks that's how you earn his love. But the monster that defines her career, the Bay Harbor butcher, is literally eating breakfast across from her. Harry praises her instincts, her work ethic, her rise from vice to homicide to lieutenant, while knowing that her greatest investigation is structurally unwinnable. How do you solve a case when your mentor designed the crime scene and your brother processes the evidence? Along the way, Harry's Protect the Innocence code produces the exact opposite outcome. By teaching Dexter to operate inside law enforcement, he guarantees that everyone closest to Dexter lives in the blast radius. Rita, endangered, and then murdered. Harrison, born into a pattern of blood, and Deb, repeatedly targeted, dating the ice truck killer in Season 1, nearly flayed by the Skinner. Walking into that church as Dexter kills Travis Marshall. Each time Harry's system claims to contain the darkness, each time it migrates closer to Deb's skin. Here's the pattern interrupt. What if Harry had done the right thing? Let's imagine he puts Dexter in intensive therapy, or commits him, or hands him over to the justice system. Does Deb get spared? Maybe she grows up without the constant gravitational pull of Dexter's double life. Maybe she doesn't have to shoot LaGuerta, doesn't end up in that hospital bed. Or maybe the trauma just reconfigures, and she's still collateral in someone else's attempt to control a monster. In this video, we're going to keep pressing that uncertainty, because Deb's tragedy isn't just about one brother's choices. It's about a father who mistook management for mercy and set both of his children on a trajectory where love and damage were always the same thing. Harry thinks he can compartmentalize a monster into a neat little code. But the real experiment is much messier. What happens when you drop that monster into a police department, hand him a badge-adjacent job, and then let his own sister climb the chain of command right next to him? To keep this clear, we need to track pressure, not just plot. Season by season, Dexter's life accumulates moving parts. At first, it's simple. Night kills, day forensics, Rita as camouflage. Then Brian appears, weaponizing Dexter's past and pulling Deb into the crosshairs. Dokes follows, reading the gaps in Dexter's story on pure instinct. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation literally grows out of Dexter's own bloodslide. Every attempt at control breeds a new variable, a new investigation, a new person with partial access to the truth. By the time Miguel, Lumen, and Hannah enter the picture, the structure is absurd. Dexter isn't a lone predator. He's running a rotating cast of confidants, prots, and accomplices. Leela knows about his darkness. Miguel learns the rituals. Lumen joins the mission. Hannah bypasses the code entirely. Each one carries a different slice of his secret, and each one leaves a trail Deb is professionally obligated to follow. How long can you juggle that many lies inside a homicide division before gravity wins? Meanwhile, Deb is not standing still. She evolves from the insecure vice cop begging for Harry's ghost to notice her, into the detective, then lieutenant, whose job is literally to see patterns Dexter needs to stay invisible. She works the ice truck killer case that is secretly about Dexter. She hunts the Skinner, while Dexter stalks his own targets in the same city. She chases the Bay Harbor Butcher, then Travis Marshall, then LaGuerta's suspicions. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that image. Deb at the murder board, connecting strings Dexter thought he'd cut. The central question becomes statistical as much as psychological. In a department built on evidence and interrogation, what are the odds that a serial killer can indefinitely fake normalcy while his own sister, trained to catch liars and already obsessed with his approval, supervises his work? Every overlapping case, every shared crime scene, every convenient coincidence Dexter waves away as luck is actually another coin flip against him. Eventually, the math stops working. So does the psychology. This is where narrative inevitability kicks in. In a story defined by secrets and investigations, having Deb discover Dexter isn't a shocking twist. It's the only coherent endpoint of the trajectory the show sets up from episode 1. Each major section will escalate that same pattern. Dexter builds a plan, the plan spawns an investigation, and the investigation lands on Deb's desk. Dexter believes he can curate who knows the truth, as if disclosure is another aspect of the code he can manage. That belief is delusional. Deb, with her rank, her proximity, and her need to understand him, was always the most likely person to shatter it, and once she does, the whole structure begins to collapse. And here's the twist that hurts the most. Even after the collapse begins, Dexter still thinks he's protecting Deb. From season 1 onward, his psychology locks her into a role she's already outgrown. In his head, Deb is the foul-mouthed little sister who cries in Harry's arms, the rookie who freezes in the field, the volatile cop who can't keep her emotions out of an investigation. She's fragile. She's breakable. She needs to be shielded. That image lets him justify a whole series of half-truths that are, ironically, far more damaging than the reality he's hiding. Let's kick things off with Brian. Dexter watches Deb fall for the ice truck killer and decides she can't handle the truth about their shared past. So he withholds everything: the childhood trauma, the blood, the connection. Deb ends up chained to a table directly in the blast radius of the plan he thought he was containing. The central question is brutal. Did Dexter protect Deb from the truth, or did his secrecy walk her to the edge of that plastic-wrapped room? To keep this clear, we need to track the pattern. He hides the code because he thinks the idea of him as a ritual killer will shatter her. He hides his doubts about Harry. He hides the Lagerta threat until it's metastasized into a career-ending, life-ending choice. Again and again, Dexter assumes Deb can't handle a controlled disclosure, then forces her to confront the ugliest version of the truth in real time. Walking in on Travis Marshall's murder, learning about his trophies, standing in that shipping container with Lagerta at gunpoint. Each reveal is not a conversation. It's a crisis. What he never grasps is the depth of her love. Deb spends her whole life chasing Harry's approval, feeling overshadowed by Dexter without knowing why, and still, when she finally learns the reason, she chooses him. She covers for him in reports. She lies to her own detectives. She kills Lagerta, not because she's weak, but because her loyalty to Dexter overrides her loyalty to the badge. Dexter reads that as proof she can bend. In reality, it's the moment her internal structure begins to crack. On paper, his plans for Deb look protective: keep her in the dark, steer her career, push her toward therapy when the PTSD spikes. Even his final plan in Season 8, leaving her behind so the hurricane can take only him, is framed as a sacrifice. But every one of those choices is a ticking time bomb for Deb's psyche. The more he underestimates her strength, the more he underestimates the scale of the damage when that strength is finally weaponized in his direction. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this blind spot, because it's not forensics that finally ends Dexter's trajectory. It's not a brilliant investigation or a flawless case. It's his inability to see the inner life of the one person who would have done anything for him. And the moment that love turns, when Deb finally tries to live without him, that's where the next phase of his collapse begins. So when we talk about Deb finally trying to live without Dexter, we hit the most uncomfortable part of her story: how much of what happens to her is tragedy, and how much is choice. The central question isn't just, did Dexter ruin Deb's life? It's, at what point does Deb start helping him do it? On one level, the case against her is brutal. The moment she walks into that shipping container in Season 7, levels her gun, and shoots Lagerta instead of Dexter, Deb crosses a line she can never walk back. She doesn't just fail to report a crime. She executes an innocent woman to protect a serial killer, and then helps Dexter stage the scene. From there, every cover story, every falsified report, every silence in the investigation is active complicity. She knows exactly what the code really is now: a permission slip for Dexter's violence. And she signs it anyway. But to keep this clear, we have to set that decision inside the pressure cooker she's been living in for years. Deb grows up chasing Harry's approval, always in Dexter's shadow, never told why the golden child in the next bedroom gets all the attention. She's kidnapped by the ice truck killer, hunted by the Skinner, used as bait, targeted, traumatized. Every major relationship she has is contaminated by Dexter's secret life: Brian, Lundy, Quinn. By the time she sees Dexter with a knife over Travis Marshall, her psychology is already hanging by a thread. So when we analyze those key decision points, turn him in, walk away, refuse to help, how realistic are they for her? Not in theory, but in practice. Could Deb really have marched into Miami Metro, handed over the blood slides, and watched Dexter become the Bay Harbor butcher on the evening news? Could she have cut all contact with the one person she's been emotionally fused to since childhood? On paper, yes. In her actual internal world, that's where the plan falls apart. This is where coerced agency comes in. Technically, Deb makes choices. No one forces her finger onto the trigger with Lagerta. No one physically drags her into Dexter's cover-ups. But those choices take place inside a cage Harry and Dexter built long before she understood what she was inside of. Harry grooms Dexter with the code and leaves Deb starved for the same intimacy. Dexter becomes her protector, her partner, her emotional anchor. When she finally learns the truth, the bars don't disappear. They just become visible. Pattern interrupt. Imagine Deb with the same facts, but without that history. Same investigation, same evidence, no lifelong dependence on Dexter. Do we honestly think she pulls that trigger in the container? Or does she arrest him on the spot? The focus is not just on assigning blame, but on recognizing that Deb's agency is both real and rigged. She is not a passive victim, dragged unconscious through Dexter's trajectory. She chooses, she rationalizes, she participates. And yet those choices are shaped by years of lies, by Harry's design, by a family story that was never true. So, where does that leave us? Is Deb the tragic victim of Dexter's life, paying the bill for a code she never consented to? Or is she a tragic co-author, someone who couldn't stop loving him enough to save herself? Along the way, the show refuses to answer cleanly, and in the next section, we'll see how that ambiguity makes her final collapse feel both inevitable and unbearably cruel. And that brings us to the uncomfortable question the finale keeps shoving in our face. Whose soul is actually in worse shape by the end? The serial killer who still thinks he has a system, or the cop who can't stop replaying one trigger pull in a shipping container? To keep this clear, we need to pin down Dexter's moral position in those last episodes. On paper, he's more self-aware than ever. He knows his code is a fiction Harry built. He's watched it fail with Brian, with Lila, with Miguel, with Trinity, with LaGuerta. Yet when he stalks Saxon, when he wheels Deb down that hallway, he's still operating from the same basic plan. My dark passenger is real, my urges are inevitable, and as long as I point them at worse people, I'm manageable. He talks about leaving the life, about Hannah and Argentina, but psychologically, he never abandons the code. He just relocates it. He's still deciding who deserves to live, still convinced he can control consequences if he's careful enough. Even his final act with Deb, disconnecting the ventilator and sailing into the storm, is framed in his own head as a twisted mercy killing and a necessary self-exile. He narrates it as atonement, not as murder plus escape. Now contrast that with Deb. By the end of season 8, she doesn't have a code. She has a crater. She calls herself a bad cop, a bad sister, a monster. One bullet into Lagerta's chest becomes the lens through which she sees every case, every arrest, every time she ever said she believed in the badge. Her body count is tiny next to Dexter's ocean of corpses, but in her own psychology, that single transgression is enough to damn her completely. This is where the moral ledger gets complicated. Do we weigh damnation by numbers or by awareness? Is a man who kills dozens but feels justified less compromised than a woman who kills once and never stops bleeding over it? Deb's collapse after the church, the PTSD, the drugs, the way she throws herself into dangerous investigations, almost as self-punishment, All of that points to someone whose conscience is painfully alive. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that contrast. Dexter rationalizes. Deb internalizes. He externalizes blame into a dark passenger and a flawed father. She swallows blame until it poisons everything. By the finale, she may actually be more morally awake than he is, because she refuses to let herself off the hook. So when we ask who the real monster is, the answer isn't clean. Is Deb's crushing guilt proof that she's been corrupted beyond repair, or proof that her conscience never fully died, even as her life collapsed around Dexter's secret? Along the way, the show uses that tension to make her fate feel less like simple punishment and more like a brutal, open question we're not supposed to resolve easily. So when we hit Deb on that operating table, the ventilator hissing, while Dexter promises a future she'll never see, we're not just watching a character die. We're watching years of audience investment crash into a wall of narrative cruelty. And that's where the backlash starts. To keep this clear, the main criticisms cluster around 3 words: arbitrary, implausible, cheap. Deb survives the shooting. She's talking. The investigation is moving. Then a random clot, a sudden brain injury, and she's effectively gone. Many viewers felt it played like a mechanical twist in an already controversial finale. A way to juice tragedy after the show had already stretched belief with Dexter's hurricane escape and lumberjack exile. If Deb was the moral heart, why end her as a plot device on a monitor flatline? But if we pull back and track the trajectory we've been tracing, a different pattern emerges. The central question isn't, does this scene make medical sense? It's, what does this moment say about the life that led here? From the little girl begging Harry to notice her, to the detective repeatedly targeted by killers orbiting Dexter, to the woman who kills Lagerda to protect the very secret that's destroying her psychology, Deb's story has always been about consequences, catching up in ways she can't control. Her death doesn't arrive as a clever twist. It lands like punctuation at the end of a sentence we've been hearing for 8 seasons. Look at how she dies. Not on a dock, not in a shootout, not in some grand sacrificial plan she chooses. A stray bullet in a chaotic confrontation, followed by a random complication, and then Dexter wheeling her body out to sea in the eye of a storm. That randomness mirrors the way his own victims often end up on the table because they happen to cross his investigation, his job, his code. And that quasi-ritual disposal, slipping her into the water where he's dumped so many bodies, turns his most sacred killing ritual into a self-inflicted funeral. The focus is not just on the brutality, it's on the symmetry. Could she have walked away? Imagine a happier ending. Deb in therapy, Deb transferring out, Deb cutting Dexter off and starting fresh. After Brian, after the ice truck killer, after the Skinner, after watching Dexter kill Travis in that church, and then murdering Lagerda herself, would that really honor the internal logic we've seen? Every season has tightened the knot between Deb and Dexter's world. Each major section will show another line she crosses for him, another piece of herself she trades away. By the time she's covering up homicides, quitting the force, and telling Dexter she wishes he'd never been born, the idea that she simply heals and moves on starts to feel like its own kind of fantasy. In this video, we're going to sit with the discomfort that creates. Because whether we like Deb's death or not, it forces us to confront a cost the show can't walk back. The monster doesn't just eat strangers. It eats his sister. And the real question is, if Deb had lived, what exactly would have been left of her anyway? So let's kick things off by going back to where Dexter thinks this all makes sense. Early on, the central question of the show is framed through his narration. Can a monster be contained by a code? We hear him describe his life like a carefully engineered system. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. No feelings, no attachments, no consequences. To keep this clear, Dexter doesn't just follow Harry's code, he mythologizes it. In season 1 and 2, the voiceover is almost smug. He tells us his urges are channeled, his ritual is precise, his job at Miami Metro is the perfect cover he controls. He believes that as long as the plan is meticulous, the dark passenger is domesticated. Deb is just background noise in that psychology. The needy little sister who wants a promotion, wants Harry's approval, wants love. But when we track Deb's actual trajectory, that illusion of control collapses. She dates Brian, the ice truck killer, because Dexter's secret past has quietly warped the entire investigation. She's kidnapped, plastic wrapped on a kill table, literally positioned as a prop in Dexter's origin story. Later, with the Skinner, she's targeted again through a case that Dexter has been manipulating from the edges. Each time, he thinks he's managing the threat. Each time, she's the one tied to the chair. If control means predicting and containing the fallout of your actions, Dexter fails Deb over and over. He frames Dokes to protect the code, and Leela finishes the job by murdering Dokes for him. Operationally, the plan works. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation dies. But that success detonates Deb's love life with Lundy, her faith in the department, her sense that justice is even possible. The focus is not just on who ends up dead, it's on how every solution Dexter engineers becomes the setup for the next wound in Deb's life. Killing Trinity is the same pattern. Dexter believes he's ended a monster and secured his family fantasy. Instead, Rita is dead in a bathtub, Harrison is traumatized, and Deb is the one who has to hold what's left together. When LaGuerta closes in, Dexter's answer is to pull Deb into the kill room, to make her choose between the law and her brother. She shoots LaGuerta, and something in Deb's moral core dies on that floor. Was that control, or just escalation in slow motion? Along the way, each major section of Dexter's life looks like a new, improved plan. New code adjustments, new rules about love, family, or isolation. But Deb's story functions as the investigation the show never names, a season-long, series-long case file on the consequences he could never model. By the time she's in that hospital bed, brain dead from a complication after yet another chain reaction he set in motion, we have to ask the existential question the series keeps dodging. If the person you love most is destroyed by your devotion to a code, was it ever a safeguard? Or was it just a bedtime story Dexter told himself so he could keep killing and still sleep at night? And if that story was a lie, then what does that make every choice that comes next? If that story was a lie, then every choice that follows has to be reweighed against the person who bleeds for it most. And that's where we have to stop pretending Dexter is the only protagonist here. Because if we track the actual trajectory of consequence, the life that really maps the cost of Dexter Morgan is Debra's. Let's kick things off with the wide shot. Deb's arc runs from a chain-smoking, insecure rookie chasing Harry's ghost to a competent lieutenant running major investigations, to a traumatized accomplice dragging bodies with her brother, to a comatose shell in a hospital bed while he stands over her and plays God. That's the full sweep. Not a rise and fall, but a rise, corruption, and erasure. From the beginning, every major turn in Dexter's plan has a mirror image in Deb's life. Season 1. Brian weaponizes her hunger for love. She dates the ice truck killer, while Dexter flirts with his own origin story. Dexter kills his brother to preserve the code. Deb wakes up strapped to a table, realizing the man she loved and the brother she worships are part of the same nightmare. His dark passenger is validated. her trust fractures. When Dexter leans into the Bay Harbor butcher persona and outsmarts the investigation, Deb is the one grinding through case files, getting promoted, earning respect. His secret survives. Her psychology bends around a lie she can't see, making her work the alibi for his double life. Keep this clear, the focus is not just on what Dexter does, but on what it forces Deb to become. He experiments with allies like Miguel, Lumen, even Hannah. Deb experiments with love and keeps getting detonated. Brian, who was always bait. Lundy, murdered in a case orbiting Dexter's chaos. Quinn, driven away by her spiraling guilt and divided loyalties. Each time Dexter recalibrates his code, she pays in blood, therapy, and lost futures. If Dexter's story is about a man trying to live with his darkness, Deb's story is about what it means to love someone whose darkness is bigger than your life. She doesn't just discover he's a killer, she covers for him, walks in on Travis Marshall's kill, and chooses to shoot Lagerta, rather than let the truth surface. He protects his secret. She executes her own moral center. Viewed through Dexter's narration, that looks like a tragic necessity. Viewed through Deb's eyes, the entire series shifts tone. It stops being a cool procedural about a meticulous killer and becomes a slow-motion tragedy about collateral damage, about a woman who keeps absorbing the blast radius of someone else's need for control. By the finale, that question we asked about the code has a living, breathing answer. Deb survives a gunshot that should have been recoverable, only to die from a complication that feels almost symbolic, a delayed systemic failure. Dexter unplugs her, sails into the storm, and the show quietly admits what his life really costs. Deb is the emotional protagonist of Consequence. Her body, her career, her sanity are the receipt for every story Dexter told himself about being necessary. So, if Deb's arc is the bill, how exactly did Dexter run up that tab, step by step? So let's kick things off by actually treating that line like evidence. If Dexter is the monster, Deb is the cost, and her entire life is a receipt for every lie he ever told, not a metaphorical receipt. A line-item ledger you can trace from her first childhood insecurity to the moment he unplugs her. To keep this clear, we can walk through the major charges. First, childhood neglect. Deb grows up in the same house as Dexter, but Harry's attention is lopsided, coded, strategic. Dexter gets the secret training. The late night talks about urges and control. Deb gets a vague sense that she's not enough, that something is missing, and no one will explain why. That's the opening balance. A daughter emotionally underfunded because a son needed a murder curriculum. Then, the interest starts compounding. She dates a serial killer, Brian, because Dexter's hidden past has literally entered the investigation she's leading. She falls for Lundy, the one man who really sees her as a detective, and he's pulled into the Bay Harbor butcher orbit until he dies on a case that exists because of Dexter's code. Quinn's suspicion of Dexter poisons that relationship. Every time Deb reaches for love, the trajectory bends back toward Dexter's secret life. Her mentor, shot in front of her. Her badge, compromised the second she walks into that church and sees Dexter killing Travis Marshall. From that point on, every arrest, every report, every internal investigation is haunted by what she's hiding. The Lagerta execution is the clearest charge on the receipt. Dexter frames Lagerta, sets the kill room, plans a clean removal of a threat. Deb walks in, hears Lagerta beg her to do the right thing, and pulls the trigger anyway. Dexter's fantasy of being a necessary evil collapses into something simpler. He's a man whose survival plan now requires his sister to become a murderer. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that gap between what Dexter tells himself and what we actually see. The central question is never really, does the code make him necessary? The investigation the show runs is, what does this necessity cost Deb? Because the series never proves that Dexter's killings save more lives than they destroy. What it does prove, relentlessly, is that Deb develops PTSD, loses her moral compass, and finally loses her life as direct consequences of his existence. So imagine the alternate timeline. Harry doesn't weaponize Dexter. Maybe he gets him real treatment. Maybe he turns him in. Maybe he doesn't adopt him at all. Deb grows up in a house without a serial killer brother, without the invisible gravity well of the code pulling every case, every promotion, every romance off course. Does she still swear too much? Still push too hard? Still chase danger? Probably. But she's not bait for Brian. Not an accessory to Lagerta's murder. Not lying awake, replaying a brother on a blood-soaked altar. That's the stark truth the finale is straining to articulate. Deb didn't just die because of Dexter. She lived every day of her adult life in a world bent around his secret, paying interest on a debt she never agreed to take on. And the most unsettling part? We still haven't tallied the final charge that makes Dexter's whole self-image impossible to maintain. So now we reach the part the series itself never quite says out loud, but every frame is circling. If Deb's entire life is the unpaid bill for Dexter's secret, then when the credits roll, whose soul is actually in worse shape? The prolific killer who believes in his own code, or the cop who breaks once, shatters her identity, and drowns in guilt she can't escape? To keep this clear, we have to recap the core tension. Dexter racks up bodies across every season, operating under Harry's code, convinced that as long as the victims are deserving, his internal ledger stays balanced. He refines the plan, upgrades the ritual, moves from Miami to Iron Lake, and still narrates as if he is in control of the investigation into his own darkness. Deb, by contrast, spends most of her trajectory chasing that darkness without understanding it lives at her breakfast table. On paper, the math looks obvious. Dexter is a serial killer. Deb is a detective who crosses one ultimate line. But the psychology complicates that simple equation. Dexter feels justified. Deb never does. When she pulls the trigger on Lagerta in that shipping container, we watch a lifetime of belief collapse in a single echoing gunshot. She doesn't rationalize it away. She doesn't fold it into a code. She breaks, and she knows she's broken. So the central question for us is this. By the end, whose inner landscape is more corrupt? Is it Dexter, who can kill his own brother, frame colleagues, abandon Harrison, and still construct a story where he's a necessary monster? Or is it Deb, who kills one woman, spends seasons drowning in PTSD and self-hatred, and then helps Dexter unplug her own life support because she thinks she deserves the consequences? Along the way, the show keeps forcing us to weigh intent versus outcome. Dexter's intent is controlled killing, but the outcome is Rita in the bathtub, Harrison in blood, Deb on that hospital bed. Deb's intent with Lagerta is to protect Dexter and preserve some twisted version of family. The outcome is the end of her career, her moral center, and eventually her life. Which matters more to you, the number of victims or the depth of remorse? And what about ignorance? For decades, Deb doesn't know the full picture. Does that lessen her responsibility when she finally chooses to help Dexter? Or does it make that moment in the church and the container even worse, because she had spent her entire life training to resist exactly that temptation? In this video, we're going to lean on you for this verdict. Drop a comment with not just your answer, but the specific moment that sealed it. Was it Lagerta's death? Deb walking into the church? Dexter unplugging her in the hospital? Because once you pick a side, a rewatch changes. Every hug, every argument, every investigation scene reads differently when you've decided whose soul is truly beyond saving. So let's kick things off by turning that question back on Deb. If Dexter's point of no return is up for debate, when did her trajectory bend so far toward collapse that being okay stopped feeling possible at all? There are a few obvious candidates. The first is almost perversely ironic. Deb dating the ice truck killer. A lonely, insecure detective, finally getting everything she thinks she wants, only to discover she's literally been sleeping next to the investigation. On a rewatch, every flirty scene with Brian feels like a trap closing. You can read that relationship as the moment the universe marks Deb as collateral, tying her love life, her body, and her career directly to Dexter's secret history. From there, she's never just a cop again, she's a recurring target. Then there's Lundy's death. A mentor, a moral compass, gunned down while she's buying coffee. No grand plan, no code, just a random seeming act that shatters her belief that the investigation and the badge can protect the people she loves. You could argue that this is the instant Deb's psychology shifts from righteous to fatalistic, where she starts expecting loss as the default consequence of attachment. But many people land on the image we've already invoked, Deb walking into the church as Dexter plunges a knife into Travis Marshall. One step through that doorway, and the last illusion dies. Her brother, her hero, her anchor, is a killer on a plastic-covered altar. If you pick this as the irredeemable moment, then everything afterward becomes damage control. Therapy, denial, the attempted cover-up of the crime scene, all read as a doomed plan to stuff reality back into a box that will not close. Of course, we can go darker. Deb killing LaGuerta at the shipyard is, structurally, her LaGuerta in the container scene. She chooses Dexter over the law, over the investigation, over herself. If that's your line in the sand, then Deb's life becomes unfixable the second she pulls the trigger and screams. From that angle, every scene in Season 8 is just the slow, administrative processing of a soul that already knows it's guilty. The attempted murder-suicide off the pier offers another brutal option. Deb driving off the road with Dexter beside her is the moment she stops trying to survive him, and instead tries to erase them both. Or maybe, for you, it's the Saxon shooting, where she takes a bullet in a case that only exists because Dexter couldn't let go. And what should have been survivable spirals into a brain death that feels like cosmic punishment. In this video, we're going to lean on you again here. Pick one. Name the scene, the line, the decision where you stopped believing Deb could ever claw her way back to normal. Then, on a rewatch, track everything before and after that timestamp. The focus is not just on what happens to her, but on how every plan, every attempt at control, bends toward that outcome. And if you completely disagree, if you think Deb was never doomed or never truly lost, stay with us, because the next section is going to press hard on that idea. So now that we've tracked every fracture point, here's the experiment we want to leave you with. Imagine hitting play on Season 1 again, but this time, Dexter isn't the protagonist. Deb is. Dexter is the slow-motion disaster, drifting closer to her life in every frame. From that first crime scene quip to her chain-smoking in the parking lot, watch Deb the way we usually watch Dexter. Follow her promotion anxiety, her hunger for Harry's approval, her awkward dates. Track the investigation from her desk, not his table. In this video, we're going to argue that on a rewatch, Dexter becomes the background radiation, and Deb is the real story we're measuring as it poisons everything. To keep this clear, give yourself a couple of concrete rules. Every time Dexter says or implies that he's in control, pause mentally and ask, What does this episode cost Deb? When he perfects a plan, when he tightens the code, when he celebrates a clean kill, what new vulnerability opens in her world? Season 1, he's dumping bodies while she's dating the ice truck killer. Season 2, he's juggling Lila while she's nearly destroyed by the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. The focus is not just on his logistics, but on the invisible consequences sliding across her trajectory. Then flip it. Every time Deb laughs, every time she's loose, hopeful, or flirting with a future, note what's lurking just off screen. Deb in a bar with Brian. Deb waking up next to Lundy. Deb imagining a normal life with Quinn. Short moment, short smile, longer shadow. We know now that each of those scenes is framed by a secret Dexter is hiding, a body he's moving, a line he's already crossed that will eventually drag her under. Along the way, start asking yourself, which Deb moment hits hardest? Now that we've laid her whole collapse out on the table, is it her begging Harry's memory for answers he never gave? Her pulling the trigger on LaGuardia? Her drifting in that hospital bed after a routine surgery turns fatal? Drop it in the comments, because we want to see whether you still experience her as a supporting character or if she's become the show's true tragedy. And because the central question of Deb's story is when her life becomes irredeemable, we want to turn that into a kind of informal research project. Rank the single moment where you think there was no way back. Was it walking into the church with Travis on the table? Was it helping Dexter dump a body? Was it the first time she lied in an official report to protect him? Post your pick, scroll through the thread, and compare where everyone plants that flag. In a series obsessed with a man who believes he can plan for every variable, control every outcome, and outmaneuver death itself, Deb is the one person who never had real control at all. If Dexter is the design, Deb is the failure report. On your next rewatch, try following her instead of him, and see how different the collapse looks when the camera in your head stays locked on Debra Morgan.